Chapter 15. The Invitation. A wave of tumultuous emotions rose up in Klein's heart after he heard Dunn. Instinctively, he uttered, "Why? The Beyonders have serious hidden dangers? So much so that the Church's internal judiciary and the Beyonders, who dealt with bizarre phenomenon, are also prone to problems?" Dunn stepped into the carriage and sat back in his seat. His expression and tone remained the same. "This is not something that you need to understand. Neither is it something you can understand, unless you become one of us." Klein was struck dumb for a moment, after which he sat down and questioned in a tone that was half dubious and half joking. "If I don't come to understand, how is it possible for me to make a decision to join?" And not joining would mean Klein could not understand. This would end in a deadlock. Dunn Smith took out the pipe once again, placed it against his nose, and took a whiff. "You probably misunderstood. A civilian staff member is also one of us. In other words, as long as I become one of your civilian staff members, I will be able to understand the relevant secrets, figure out the hidden dangers that plague Beyonders, and the dangers that may be encountered, as well as consider whether I want to become a Beyonder later." Klein reorganized his thoughts and paraphrased what Dunn had shared. Dunn smiled and said, "Yes, that is the case, except for one point. You cannot simply become a Beyonder just because you want to, because every church will be equally strict in this aspect. It would be odd if the churches were not strict." Klein lampooned silently, as he added with a more intense tone coupled with stronger body language, "What about civilian staff members? This should be quite strict as well, right?" "There shouldn't be any problems if it's you," said Dunn with half-closed eyelids as he whiffed the pipe with partially relaxed countenance. However, he did not ignite it. "Why?" Klein asked as he was once again grappled by doubt. At the same time, he jested inwardly. "So my uniqueness and halo as a transmigrator are akin to the fireflies in the night, ever so bright and outstanding?" Dunn opened his half-closed eyelids, his silver-colored eyes reflecting the same tranquility as before. "First, you managed to survive without our help in such a situation. Certain exceptional qualities are not present in others. For instance, luck. Lucky people are often welcomed." Seeing that Klein's expression had turned blank, Dunn smiled slightly. "All right, just treat this as a humorous statement. Second, you're a graduate of the history department from Koei University. This is something we urgently need. Although a believer of the Lord of the Storms, Lumi perceives women in a way that is loathsome, his views regarding society, humanities, economics, and politics remain incisive. He said before that talents are key to maintaining a competitive advantage and positive development, a point that I very much agree with." Noticing that Klein was slightly furrowing his eyebrows, Dunn casually explained, "You should be able to imagine that we often encounter documents and objects from the Fourth Epoch or earlier. Many cults and heretics have tried to gain power from these things. Sometimes, they themselves can lead to strange and terrible things. Except for the Beyonders in special fields, most of us are not good with our studies, or have passed that age." Having said that, Dunn Smith pointed to his own head, and the corner of his mouth turned up slightly as if he was mocking himself. He then said, "Those dry, boring knowledge always puts us to sleep. Even the sleepless can't help it. In the past, we would cooperate with historians or archaeologists, but this posed the risk of exposing secrets, and mishaps might befall on these otherwise uninvolved professors and associate professors. Thus, the addition of a professional in our ranks is hard to refuse." Klein nodded lightly and accepted Dunn's explanation. With his thoughts all over the place, he asked, "Then why don't you directly, groom one?" Dunn continued, "This brings me to the third point, which is also the final and most important point. You've already been through a similar ordeal, so inviting you doesn't violate the confidentiality clause. With regard to developing others, I will bear the responsibility of exposure if it fails. Most of our team members, our civilian staff members, come from within the church." After Klein finished listening silently, he asked curiously, "Why are you so strict about maintaining confidentiality? Wouldn't spreading the news publicly to more people and increasing awareness lessen the chances of a similar mistake from happening again?" "The greatest fear stems from the fear of the unknown, we can make the unknown become known. No, humanity's stupidity is beyond your imagination. It actually leads to more people emulating these acts, creating more chaos and more severe incidents. Dunn Smith shook his head and replied. Klein acknowledged as he replied in enlightenment, the only lesson that humans can learn from history is that humans do not gain any lessons from history, and they're always repeating the same tragedies. That famous quote from Emperor Roselle is indeed filled with much philosophical meaning, agreed Dunn. Emperor Roselle said that? This transmigrator senior really did not give the latecomers any chance to posture. Klein did not know how to follow up on Dunn's words. Dunn turned his head and gazed out of the horse carriage. The dim yellowish light of the street lamps intertwined to display the splendor of civilization. There is a similar discourse within the judiciary of the major churches. This may be the main reason for the strict confidentiality and the prohibition of ordinary people from knowing. What is it? Klein asked as his interest was piqued, pleasured that he seemed to be spying on secrets. Dunn turned his head, his facial muscles pulled themselves so slightly that it was hardly visible. Faith and fear bring troubles. More faith and more fear bring more troubles, until everything is destroyed. After he said that, Dunn signed, besides praying for the blessings and help from gods, humans can't solve their real major problems. Faith and fear bring troubles. More faith and more fear bring more troubles, Klein recited silently, but he could not fully understand it. What followed next was the fear of uncertainty that came from the unknown. It was like the dark shadows formed by the street lights outside. In the darkness without light, it appeared as though there were pairs of callous-looking eyes and wide-opened mouths. As the horse galloped vigorously and nimbly while the wheels of the horse carriage reeled on ahead with Iron Cross Street in sight, Dunn broke the silence suddenly and formally invited Klein. Would you like to join us as a civilian staff member? In Klein's mind, multiple thoughts surfaced, making him indecisive. He contemplated and asked, "Can I have some time to consider?" Since this matter had serious implications, he could not hastily and recklessly make the decision. "No problem, just give me a reply before Sunday," Dunn nodded and added. "Of course, remember to keep this a secret and don't disclose the information regarding Welch to anyone, including your brother and sister. Once this is violated, it'll not only bring them trouble, but you might also have to attend a special court." "Okay," Klein answered gravely. The carriage was once again plunged into silence. Seeing that they were nearing Iron Cross Street and that he was almost reaching home, Klein suddenly thought of a question. He hesitated for a few seconds before asking, "Mr. Smith, what kind of salary and benefits do civilian staff get?" This was a serious question. Taken aback momentarily, Dunn smiled instantly and answered, "There's no need for you to worry about this issue. Our funds are guaranteed by the church and the police department. For newly registered civilian staffs, the weekly salaries are placed at £2.10 solely. There is an additional 10 solely as compensation for the risk and confidentiality. All of this will add up to a total of £3. This is hardly worse than a confirmed university lecturer. After which, your salary will gradually rise according to your experience and contributions. As for civilian staff members, the contract is generally 5 years. After 5 years, you can quit normally if you're no longer willing to stay. You only have to sign a lifetime confidentiality agreement and you're not allowed to leave Tianjin until permission is given. If you want to move to another city, the first thing you must do is register with the local Nighthawk. By the way, there are no weekends and you can only work in shifts. At any point in time, there should be 3 civilian staffs on duty, and if you wish to go to the South or Desi Bay for a vacation, you'll need to arrange it with your colleagues." Just as Dunn finished speaking, the horse carriage pulled to a stop and the apartment building where Klein and his siblings resided appeared on the side. "I get it now." Klein turned around and walked down the horse carriage. He stopped at the side and asked, "By the way, Mr. Smith, where do I find you after I've come to my decision?" Dunn gave a deep and low throaty laugh before saying, "Go to the Hound Pub at Bisick Street and find their boss, right? Tell him that you want to hire a small mercenary squad for a mission." "Huh?" Klein asked confusedly. "Our location is confidential too." Before you agree to become one of us, I can't tell you directly. All right, Mr. Klein Moretti, I wish you a good dream tonight as well, Dunn smiled as he said. Klein took off his hat and saluted, watching as the pace of the departing horse carriage gradually sped up. He took out his pocket watch. Click, he pressed it open and saw that it was only a little past 4 in the morning. The street was filled with a relaxing, cool breeze. A dim yellowish light from the street lamps illuminated the surroundings. Klein drew a deep breath and took in the deep silence of the night around him. The busiest and noisiest district in the day could be so lifeless and quiet at night. This was in stark contrast to the silent observations and medium seance in Welch's residence. It was only then that Klein realized that the back of his linen shirt was unknowingly drenched in sweat, cold and clammy. Chapter 16, Rat Baiting with Dogs. Phew, I finally got through the round with the medium. Klein let out a foul breath. He slowly turned around and enjoyed the cool breeze and tranquility of the night while walking closer and closer to the apartment building's door. He took out his keys, inserted the correct one in and turned it gently, allowing the crimson mixed darkness to expand with the creaking sound of the open door. Walking on the staircase without a single person in sight and taking in the cold air, Klein had an inexplicable and amazing feeling. It felt like he had a few more hours than others. This caused him to hasten his pace. In a similar state of mind, he opened the door to his room and before he even stepped inside, he saw a silhouette sitting silently in front of his desk. It had reddish-black hair, bright brown eyes, and a delicate, pretty face. Undoubtedly, she was Melissa Moretti. "Klein, where did you go?" Melissa asked curiously as she relaxed her eyebrows. Without waiting for Klein's reply, she added, "Just now, I got up to go to the bathroom and realized you weren't home." It was as if she wanted to know everything clearly, from the causes and effects of the matter to the underlying logic. With great experience at lying to his parents, Klein's brain took a spin before he gave a bitter smile and calmly replied, "I couldn't fall asleep again after I woke up. Instead of wasting time, I decided that I should train my body. So I went out to run a few rounds. Look at my sweat." He took off his jacket and half-turned his body, pointing to his back. Melissa stood up, took a glance half-heartedly and deliberated for a few moments before saying, "Honestly speaking, Klein, you don't have to stress yourself out. I'm sure you can pass the interview to Tianjin University. Even if you can't, if, you can still find better ones. I haven't even thought about the interview." Klein nodded his head and said, "I understand." He did not mention the offer that he had gotten because he had not decided whether he wanted to join them or not. Staring at Klein intensely, Melissa suddenly turned around and trotted into the interior of the house. She took out an object that resembled a tortoise. It was comprised of items like gears, rusted iron, torsion springs and ordinary springs. After quickly tightening the torsion spring, Melissa placed the object on the desk. Caw. 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 Dum. 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 The tortoise moved and jumped with a rhythm that could pull anyone's attention. Whenever I feel irritated, I feel much better seeing this tortoise move. I've been doing this very often recently and it's very effective. Klein, give it a try, invited Melissa as her eyes brightened. Klein did not turn down his sister's goodwill. He approached the tortoise and waited for it to stop before laughing. He said, "Simplicity and regularity can indeed help relaxation." Without waiting for Melissa's reply, Klein pointed to the tortoise and casually asked, "Did you make this yourself? When did you make this? Why wasn't I aware of it? I made use of unwanted materials from school and things picked up from the streets to make this. It was only finished 2 days ago," Melissa said in her usual tone, the side of her lips upturned a few more degrees. "That's impressive," Klein praised sincerely. As a boy with poor skills in machine assembly, he encountered great difficulties even assembling a 4-wheel toy car as a child. With her chin slightly raised and her eyes slightly bent, Melissa calmly replied, "It was okay." Being overly humble is a bad trait. Klein smiled slightly and continued, "This is a tortoise, right?" Instantly, the atmosphere in the room took a great plunge, leaving behind an air of graveness for a while. Then, Melissa faintly replied with a voice that seemed enigmatic like the crimson veil, "It's a puppet." Puppet. Klein gave an awkward smile, and tried to forcefully explain, "The problem lies in the materials, they're too rudimentary." Following that, he tried to change the topic and said, "Why would you go to the bathroom in the middle of the night? Isn't there a toilet here? Don't you always sleep till dawn?" Melissa was taken aback momentarily. It was only after a few seconds, before she opened her mouth, prepared to explain. At that moment, an intense sound of digestion sounded from her thoraco-abdominal area. "I'll go get some more sleep." Bang! She grabbed her tortoise-like puppet, trotted to the interior of the house, and closed the door to her room. Last night's dinner was too good, she ate too much and now her stomach is having trouble digesting it. Klein shook his head as he smiled, slowly walking towards his desk. He sat down soundlessly, silently pondering Dunn Smith's invitation as the crimson-red moon emerged from behind the dark clouds. Being a Nighthawk civilian staff member had its apparent disadvantages. With me being a transmigrator, the fool, initiator of the mysterious gathering, and the multiple secrets I have, it will be risky to be under the noses of the Church of the Evernight Goddesses team that specializes in dealing with matters regarding the Beyonders. As long as I joined Dunn Smith and his team, I would certainly aim to become a Beyonder. I could then cover up the benefits gained from the gathering. Yet, becoming a formal member would entail many restrictions on my freedom, like how a civilian staff has to report his leaving of Tingen. No longer would I be able to go wherever I want or do whatever I want. I would miss many opportunities. The Nighthawks are a strict organization. Once a mission is given, I can only wait for the arrangements and accept orders. There is no room for rejection. Beyonders have the risk of losing control. Having all the disadvantages listed out one by one, Klein turned to considering the necessities and advantages. Judging from the situation of the luck enhancement ritual, I'm not one of the 80% of lucky people. In the future, there is bound to be some bizarre event happening to me, increasing the dangers I face. Only by becoming one of the Beyonders or by joining the Nighthawks can I be equipped with the ability to resist. The wish to become a Beyonder cannot be solely reliant on the gathering. The potion formula is not a major problem, but where can I find the corresponding materials? How am I to obtain and concoct them? Not forgetting the noose of daily practice, I'm faced with serious obstacles. It is just not possible for me to consult Justice and the Hanged Man on every matter and exchange every object with them. This would not only hurt the image of the fool and arouse their suspicions, but there will also be inadequate time to communicate on such trivial issues. Similarly, I am unable to produce anything that can pique their interest. Besides, more materials would more often than not leave behind the trail of my real identity. Then, online disputes would effectively be transformed into offline conflicts, bringing about immense troubles. By joining the Nighthawks, there would definitely be contact with the common knowledge of the world of mystery and relevant channels. This can sufficiently accumulate into a corresponding social circle and can be used as leverage. Only then can I initiate the gathering and in turn gain the greatest benefits from Justice and the Hanged Man. In reality, the gains can feed back into reality, allowing me to obtain more resources and form a virtuous cycle. Of course, I could also go to an organization that is suppressed by the various churches such as the psychology alchemists mentioned by Dunn and join them. Yet I'll also lose my freedom, and be in a constant state of fear and anxiety. However, more importantly, I have no idea where to look for them. Even if I manage to gain the corresponding information from the Hanged Man, such rash contact with them could endanger my life. Becoming a civilian staff leaves opportunity for a buffer and exit. The inferior recluse hides away in the wild, the superior, the crowd. Perhaps the identity as a Nighthawk can be a better cover. In the future, when I become one of the top authorities of the tribunal, who would imagine that I am a heretic, the head of the secret organization who is working behind the scenes? As the first rays of the morning sun shone, the crimson disappeared. Gazing at the golden light on the horizons of the sky, Klein made up his mind. He would find Dunn Smith today and become part of the Nighthawk civilian staff. At this moment, Melissa, who had gotten out of bed again, had pushed open the door to the room. She was surprised to see her brother stretching in an unglamorous manner. "You didn't sleep?" "I was thinking through some things." Klein smiled, feeling relaxed. Melissa thought for a moment and said, "Whenever I encounter problems, I'll list out both the pros and cons one by one and compare them. After that, I would be able to get a hint of what I should do next." "That's a good habit." "I did that too," Klein smiled and replied. Melissa's countenance was relaxed, and she did not add more. Holding a yellowish sheet of paper in her toiletries, she headed to the bathroom. Not in a hurry to leave after he finished his breakfast and his sister's departure, Klein took a good nap. Based on what he knew, nearly all the pubs were closed in the morning. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, he smoothed the pleats of his silk hat and handkerchief using a small brush. He also removed the dirt to re-establish the tidiness. Thereafter, he wore a suit of formal clothing, just like he was going for an interview. Bisick Street was a little far, and Klein was afraid that he would miss the working hours of the Nighthawk. Therefore, he did not walk there, but instead waited for public horse carriage at Iron Cross Street. In the Lone Kingdom, public horse carriages were placed under two categories, without track and with track. The former consisted of a carriage drawn by 2 horses and could sit approximately 20 people while taking into account the top of the carriage. Only a general route existed, without specific stations. It had flexible operations and could be hailed anywhere unless it was full. The latter was operated by the Orbital Carriage Company. First, a rail-like service device was laid on the main street. The horses would move on the inner lane while the wheels ran on the tracks, making it easier and more labor-saving. This could thus pull a bigger double-decker carriage that sat nearly 50 passengers. However, the only problem was that the route and stations were fixed, making many places inaccessible. After 10 minutes, the sound of the wheels hitting the tracks approached from a distance. A double-decker horse carriage stopped in front of the station at Iron Cross Street. "To Bisick Street," Klein said to the carriage driver. "You have to transfer at Champagne Street, but when you get there, it takes about 10 minutes to walk to Bisick Street," explained the carriage driver to Klein, with regards to the route. "Let's go to Champagne Street then." Klein nodded in approval. "It's more than 4 kilometers, 4 pence, said a young man with a fair and clean face, as he extended his hand. He was a worker responsible for money collection. "Okay." Klein fished out 4 copper coins from his pocket and handed it to the other party. He walked up to the carriage and found that there were not many passengers. Even on the first floor, there were a few empty seats. "I only have 3 pence on me now, so I can only walk when I go back." Klein pressed his hat down and sat down firmly. On this floor, the men and women were mostly well-dressed, although there were a few clothed in their work clothes, leisurely reading newspapers. Almost no one spoke, and it was quite quiet. Klein shut his eyes and recharged his strength, oblivious to the coming and going of passengers around him. Station after station passed until he finally heard the few words, "Champagne Street." After alighting the horse carriage, he inquired along the way and soon reached Bisick Street, where he saw the pub with the brownish-yellow hound logo. Klein reached out his right hand and gave a forceful push. The heavy door gradually opened, inundating him with a wave of uproarious noises and an impetuous heat wave. Although it was still afternoon, there were already many customers in the pub. Some were temporary workers, looking for opportunities here, waiting to be hired. Others were simply idling around, numbing themselves with alcohol. The pub was dimly lit. In the center, there were 2 large iron cages with a third of its bottom sinking deep into the ground without any gaps. People held wooden wine cups and surrounded it, sometimes discussing loudly while laughing, sometimes cursing loudly. Giving a curious glance, Klein found 2 dogs caged inside. One was black and white, similar to the husky found on Earth. The other was wholly black, with shiny fur, making it look healthy and fierce. "Do you want to bet?" "Doug has won 8 games in a row," said a little man wearing a brown beret, as he neared Klein and pointed to the black dog. "Bet?" Taken aback at first, Klein regained his senses immediately. Dogfighting? When he was at Koei University, those aristocratic and wealthy students would always ask him contemptuously and curiously if the boorish workers and unemployed hooligans enjoyed participating in boxing and gambling at the pubs. Besides being able to gamble on boxing and card games, didn't it also include cruel and bloody activities like cockfighting, dogfighting, and others? The short man smirked. "Mister, we're civilized people. We don't engage in such unglamorous activities." Having said that, he whispered, "Besides, laws were introduced to ban these things last year." "Then what are y'all betting on?" asked Klein curiously. "The better hunter." Just as the short man finished his sentence, a resounding cacophony sounded. He turned his head, waved his hands excitedly, and said, "You can't place a bet for this round as it has started, wait for the next one then." Upon hearing that, Klein tipped his toes, lifted his head, and looked as far as he could. He saw two strong men each dragging a sack, coming to the side of the iron cage and opening the prison door. They then dumped the contents of the sack into the cage. There were gray and disgusting animals. Klein tried to identify them carefully before realizing that they were rats. Hundreds of rats. As the iron cage was deep underground without any gaps, the rats moved in all directions but could not find a way out. Right then, just as the door of the cage was closed, the chain of the two dogs were untied. Woof! The black dog pounced ahead and killed a rat in one bite. The black and white dog was dazed at first before it started playing excitedly with the rats. The surrounding people either raised their wine cups and intensified their gaze or shouted loudly, "Bite it! Kill it! Doug, Doug! Motherfucking rat baiting with dogs, sup, 2/sup." Klein regained his senses and the corner of his mouth twitched unceasingly. The objective of the gamble is to determine which dog can catch more rats. Perhaps, one can even bet on the specific number of rats caught. No wonder there were people purchasing live rats at Iron Cross Street. That's really unique. Klein shook his head, laughing as he backtracked, and circled along the edge of the alcoholic customers, and reached the front of the bar. "New here," said the bartender as he spared Klein a glance while wiping the cups. He continued, "1 cup of rye beer is a penny. And Matt beer costs 2 pence. 4 pence for Southville beer, or do you want a cup of purely brewed malt lanty?" "I came here for Mr. Wright," said Klein directly and bluntly. The bartender whistled and shouted to the side, "Old man, someone is looking for you." "Oh, who?" a vague voice sounded, and an intoxicated old man stood up from behind the bar. He rubbed his eyes, shifted his gaze to Klein and asked, "Lad, were you looking for me?" "Mr. Wright, I would like to hire a small mercenary squad for a mission," replied Klein, according to what Dunn had instructed. "A small mercenary squad? Are you living in an adventure story?" "This hasn't been around for a long time," the bartender interrupted and smiled. Wright went silent for a few seconds before saying, "Who told you to look for it here?" "Dunn. Dunn Smith," replied Klein in all honesty. Instantly, Wright broke out in a chuckle and replied, "I see. Actually, the small mercenary squad still exists. It's just in another form, with a more contemporary name. You can find it on the second floor of number 36 Zutland Street." "Thank you," thanked Klein sincerely before he turned and squeezed out of the pub. Before he went out the pub, the alcoholic customers who surrounded him suddenly quieted down, as they murmured, "Doug was actually defeated." Klein smiled and shook his head. Then he left quickly and found his way to the nearby Zoeterland Street after asking around. 30, 32, 34. Here, he counted the house numbers and walked into the stairwell. Going around the corner and slowly climbing up the stairs, he saw the vertical sign with the current name of the so-called small mercenary squad. Blackthorn Security Company. Chapter 17, Special Operations Department, Blackthorn Security Company. Upon seeing the signboard, Klein felt surprised yet found it reasonable. "Man, what do I say about this?" He shook his head and laughed before walking up the steps and knocking gently on the half-closed door with his right hand. Knock. 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 The sound echoed slowly but rhythmically, but there was no response. Only a faint sputtering sound could be heard. Knock. 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 Klein repeated, only to be met with the same outcome. He switched to pushing the door, making the gap larger as he stared inside. A classic sofa which might have been for serving guests, a soft fabric armchair, and a burly wood coffee table. There was a girl with brown hair behind a table right across with her head drooped. Even though security company is just a guise, isn't this just too unprofessional? How long has this place been out of business? Right, you guys don't need any business. Klein drew closer as he complained silently and knocked on the table just beside the girl's ear. Knock. Knock. The brown-haired girl sat up immediately and swiftly took the newspaper in front of her, covering her face. Tianjin City Honest Paper. Nice name. Klein silently read the title of the page facing him. The steam train service Soaring Express that directly reaches Constant City is starting operations today. Oh come on, when will there be one that goes straight to Brindisi Bay? I really don't want to take the ship there again, it's too awful, really awful. Hey, who are you? The girl with brown hair read pretentiously and gave her opinion. As she spoke, she lowered the newspaper and revealed her bright forehead and light brown eyes, looking at Klein with a fawning and startled look. Hello, I am Klein Moretti, and I am here at the invitation of Dunn Smith, Klein said as he took down his hat to his chest and bowed slightly. The brown-haired girl looked to be in her early 20s. She wore a light green, Lone-style dress. She was set off with beautiful laces on her sleeves, collar, and chest. The captain, all right, wait here for a moment. I'll go get him. The girl scurried up and went into the room beside her. She didn't even serve a cup of water or anything. The level of service awareness is worrying. Klein smiled faintly as he waited at his spot. After 2 to 3 minutes, the brown-haired girl opened the door and came out. She said with a sweet smile, Mr. Moretti, please follow me. The captain is on watch at the Chinese gate, and is unable to leave at the moment. Okay. Klein quickly followed behind. In his mind, he pondered to himself. Chinese gate, what could that be? Going through the partition, the first thing he saw was a small corridor, with only 3 offices on each side. Some of these offices were locked tight, while some were opened, revealing someone on the inside who typed non-stop on a heavy mechanical typewriter. At a glance, Klein noticed a familiar figure, the young officer that had investigated his apartment, the one with the black hair and blue eye and romantic vibe of a poet. He was not in official wear, his white-collared shirt was not tucked in, making for quite an unruly appearance. Perhaps he really is a poet. Klein nodded in greeting and was greeted with a smile. The brown-haired girl pushed open the left office door at the end of the room and pointed inside, chirping, we still have to go down a few levels. This office had no furniture in place, only a grayish-white stone staircase that extended downwards. The 2 sides of the stairs were lit up by gas lamps. The stable glow dispelled the darkness and gave a sense of harmony. The brown-haired girl walked in front, staring at her feet while walking carefully. Although I walk here often, I am still constantly afraid of falling down, tumbling down like a barrel. You don't know, Leonard did such a folly. On the first day of becoming a sleepless, the first day where he had not mastered his new powers, he tried to rush down the flight of stairs. And then he became a cartwheel. It was hilarious if you think about it. Oh yes, it was the guy that greeted you just now. This was about 3 years ago. Speaking of which, I have been with the Nighthawks for 5 years. I was only 17 when I joined. The girl watched her steps as she spoke. Suddenly, she smacked her forehead and said, I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Roseanne. My father was a member of the Nighthawks, who sacrificed himself in an accident 5 years ago. I suppose we are colleagues from now on. Yeah, colleague is the right word. We are not teammates since we are not Beyonders. I hope to have the honor, but still it depends on what Mr. Smith has to say, Klein said as he sized up the enclosed surroundings. He felt that they were going underground. Dampness seeped out from the stone walls, dispelling the summer heat. Don't worry, the fact that you came so far means the captain has agreed. I've always been a little afraid of him, even though he is amiable, a fatherly figure. I don't know why, but I'm still afraid. Roseanne spoke as though there was a piece of sweet in her throat. Klein answered humorously, isn't being afraid of a father normal? True. Roseanne said as she held the wall around the bend. As they spoke, the two finished walking down the stairs and reached a stone-paved floor. It was a long aisle. Both sides of the walls were mounted with gas lamps surrounded by metal gratings. Klein and Roseanne's shadows were elongated under the illumination. Klein keenly noticed that there was a dark sacred emblem every few meters, the symbol of the Evernight goddess. A deep black background dotted with sparkling embellishments, as they clustered precisely half the crimson moon. These emblems did not seem special, but walking between them gave Klein a sense of serenity. Roseanne also stopped talking, unlike her previous talkative state. Before long, an intersection appeared up front. Roseanne briefly introduced, the path to the left will lead to the St. Selena Cathedral, to the right are the armory, storeroom, and archives. And straight ahead is the Chinese Gate. St. Selena Cathedral? Then, Zutland Street is just behind Red Moonlight Street? Klein was a little stunned. St. Selena Cathedral of Red Moonlight Street was the headquarters of the Church of the Evernight Goddess in Tianjin, a sacred ground where local followers yearned to visit. Along with Holy Nemeric's Cathedral, of the Church of the God of Steam and Machinery in the suburbs, and the River and Sea Cathedral, of the Church of the Lord of Storms in North Tianjin, they sustained the religious circles in Tianjin City and its affiliated towns and villages. Aware that his status made it unsuitable for him to ask more, Klein only listened silently. They passed the intersection and moved straight ahead. In less than a minute, a black iron split gate carved with 7 sacred emblems were seen. It stood there, heavy, cold and domineering, like a giant guarding in the darkness. Chinese Gate. Roseanne reminded him and pointed at the room beside them, saying, Captain is inside. Go on in by yourself. All right, thank you. Klein replied politely. The room Roseanne was referring to was just in front of Chinese Gate. The windows were opened, revealing the lit room inside. Klein took a deep breath to calm himself. Knock. 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 Come in. He heard Dunn Smith's deep and amiable voice. Klein opened the unlatched door gently. There was only a table and 4 chairs inside. Dunn Smith, with his high hairline, who was wearing the black coat from the previous night plus a gold watch chain around his chest, was reading the newspaper leisurely. Come and have a seat. Have you decided? Are you certain you want to join us? Dunn smiled and asked as he put down the newspaper. Klein removed his hat and bowed, then he sat beside the table and said, Yes, I am certain. Then take a look at this deed, heh. People like to call it a contract now. Dunn pulled out the table drawer and took out 2 contract copies. There were not many clauses, and most of them had been mentioned by Dunn Smith. The emphasis was on the confidential clause. Violators were tried in the tribunal courts of the Church of the Evernight Goddess instead of the kingdom's courts. It was akin to how soldiers and officers were sent to court-martial for trials. A 5-year contract. £2 and 10 solely for weekly wages, 10 solely as compensation for the risk and confidentiality. Klein read through it and answered resolutely, I've no problem with it. Then sign it, Dunn said as he pointed to the dark red fountain pen and ink. Klein used a piece of waste paper to try out the pen before drawing a breath. He signed on both contracts with his name, Klein Moretti. As he did not have a stamp yet, he could only use his thumbprint. Dunn received the contract, took out a stamp from the drawer, and stamped on the end of the contract and a few key parts. With that done, he stood up and returned a contract with one hand, and reached for Klein with the other saying, Welcome, from now on, you are one of us, and please note that the contract is confidential as well. Klein stood up as well. He received the contract, shook his hand, and said, So, I shall be addressing you as Captain? Yes. Dunn's grayish eyes seemed especially deep in the dim surroundings. After shaking hands, they sat down. Klein glanced at the stamp on the contract. It read, Nighthawk Squad, Tinjin City, Awa County, Lone Kingdom. I can't believe you guys would use the name Blackthorn Security Company as a disguise, he laughed and said. Actually, we have other signboards. Dunn pulled out a piece of paper from the drawer. It was stamped with the stamps of the city government and the police department. The content were as follows: 7th Unit, Special Operations Department, Awa County Police, Lone Kingdom. The first 4 units are the regular police responsible for general security, like the VIP Protection Unit and Key Installations Protection Unit. And from Unit 5 onwards are the ones dealing with supernatural incidents in each city. Our unit is responsible for incidents related to the followers of Evernight Goddess in Tinjin. If there are different types of followers, then we divide the area accordingly. We are mainly in charge of places like the North, West and the Golden Indus region. Dunn briefly introduced, Unit 6 of the mandated Punisher Squad under the Church of the Lord of Storms is in charge of the Pier region, the East, and the South. The university area and the suburbs are under Unit 5, which is the Machinery Hive Mind Squad in Tinjin. Right. Klein had no questions about it. He then laughed. What happens if someone really comes here due to the Blackthorn Security Company signboard and requests for our services? We'll take those requests, why shouldn't we? As long as it doesn't affect our daily operations, Dunn said slowly and humorously. Any earnings would be considered additional bonuses, so our members are quite willing to take those jobs. Anyway, the market for trivial and troublesome matters such as finding dogs and cats have been monopolized by private detectives. So how many people are there in this Nighthawk squad? Klein asked since they were on this topic. There aren't many supernatural incidents, so there are even fewer Beyonders. There are only 6 formal members of the Nighthawks in the entire Tinjin city, including me. Heh, as for civilian staff, there are 6 including you. Klein nodded his head, and eventually asked the question that he was most concerned about. So, Captain, what do you mean by Beyonders losing control? Why does it happen? Chapter 18, Origin and Cause. Upon hearing Klein's question, Dunn looked out of the window toward the corridor that led to Cheney's gate. He took out his pipe, stuffed it with some tobacco and mint leaves, and held it to his nose. He took a deep whiff as his voice turned reflective and drifting. Only at home can I enjoy the beautiful flavors of tobacco mixed with mint leaves without any worries. Klein, do you know about the creation myth? Of course, when I received primary education during Sunday school, we learned to read using the revelation of Evernight. Among them, the Book of Wisdom and the letters from the saints mentioned the myth of creation. Klein attempted to recall via the memory fragments of the original Klein. He slowed down his tempo and said, the Creator awoke from chaos and shattered the darkness, creating the first ray of light. He then fused himself completely into the universe and made up all of existence. His body became the land and stars. One of his eyes became the sun, while the other became the crimson moon. Some of his blood rushed into the seas and rivers, nourishing and nurturing lives. Klein subconsciously paused when he said that. Partially, it was because the relevant memories were a blur and that the creation myth was very similar to the Chinese creation myth of Pangu. The imaginations of people from different worlds shared something in common on their myths and legends. Noticing that Klein was having trouble, Dunn smiled and added, his lungs turned into the elves, his heart turned into the giants, his liver turned into the Treants, his brain turned into the dragons, his kidneys turned into the feather serpents, his hair turned into the phoenixes, his ears turned into the demonic wolves, his mouth and teeth turned into the mutants, and his remaining bodily fluids turned into the sea monsters, of which the essence was Naga. His stomach, his small and large intestines, and the evil parts of his body turned into devils, evil spirits, and various kinds of unknown maleficent existences. His spirit became the eternal blazing sun, the Lord of the storms, and the God of knowledge and wisdom. His wisdom gave birth to humanity. That was the first epoch, the chaos epoch. Klein finished the last sentence for Dunn, but he found it funny and ridiculous. As a keyboard folklorist, it was the first time he came into contact with a creation myth that was arranged in such great detail. It was so detailed that almost every prominent race corresponded to a particular body part of the creator. It's like a children's song with children sitting in a row and eating fruit. Furthermore, it was not only mentioned in the canon of the Evernight goddess. The churches of the Lord of Storms and God of Steam and Machinery also had similar descriptions. None of them alleviated themselves or devalued the other gods. This either means that the creation myth is real or hints that the few churches had undergone a long period of strife before compromising before the fifth epoch. With this in mind, Klein suddenly had another question. He asked with a frown, "It feels problematic. Why are the eternal blazing sun, Lord of Storms, and God of knowledge and wisdom born directly from the Creator's spirit, while the goddess isn't?" In the revelation of Evernight's prehistorical records, the Evernight goddess had only awoken at the end of the second epoch. Together with the Lord of Storms, eternal blazing sun, and other gods, she blessed and helped humanity survive the cataclysm. It was also known as the third epoch, the cataclysm epoch. It was during that time that Mother Earth and the god of war appeared as well. As for the god of steam and machinery, whose original name was the god of craftsmanship, he was born only in the fourth epoch. In that sense, the standing among the gods seemed self-evident. The ones who were more ancient was more orthodox. It was extremely clear. This also troubled the believers of the Evernight goddess. Dunn Smith held his pipe with another hand and instead of answering, he returned with a question, "Repeat the goddess's full title." Klein immediately felt like he had stabbed himself with a knife. He racked his brains and tried his best to recall. The Evernight goddess is nobler than the stars and more eternal than eternity. She is also the Lady of Crimson, the Mother of the Secrets, the Empress of Disaster and Horror, Mistress of Calm and Silence. Thankfully, Klein's mother was a devout believer of the Evernight goddess. When she was still alive, she would recite this every evening at dinner. Even though the memories of the original Klein had fragmented, not all was lost. What does the Lady of Crimson symbolize? Dunn asked with a guiding tone. The red moon. The moment Klein answered, he immediately understood. Then which part of the Creator did the red moon come from? Asked Dunn with a smile. A single eye. Klein and Dunn smiled at each other. This was no way less impressive than the Lord of Storms, who was formed from a third of the Creator's spirit. As for the churches of Mother Earth and the God of War, they likely had similar explanations. However, the god of steam and machinery had been born too late to find a reason, thus, their church had been weak in the past 1,000+ years. It was only with the invention of the steam engine that they seized the opportunity to truly be on par with the other gods. Dunn stroked his pipe gently. Humanity was born out of the wisdom of the Creator, so we have clever and extraordinary brains, but lack other magical powers. However, from the creation myth, we can form a simple but clear conclusion. Everything stems from the same origin. Stems from the same origin, Klein repeated the last few words. According to this conclusion, humans who are protected by the gods were able to resist the giants, devils, and the mutants. Gradually, they figured out means to obtain the power of the Beyonders. That is by using the corresponding parts of the evil spirits, dragons, monsters, magical trees, flowers, or crystals and combining them with other materials to form potions. By consuming and absorbing the potion, one will gain different powers. This is common knowledge among mysticism studies. Dunn did not elaborate in detail and only gave a brief introduction. In this process, our ancestors relied on painful lessons to discover that if they were to consume high-grade or extraordinary potions, it would easily lead to tragic consequences. There are 3 possible outcomes. Which 3? Pressed Klein curiously. First, mental death and the complete breakdown of a body. Every piece of flesh would become a terrifying monster. Second, their personality will be changed by the powers contained in the potion. They will turn cold, sensitive, irascible, cruel, and indifferent. Third, well, Dunn put down his pipe and picked up a porcelain cup and took a sip. Fermo coffee from the Paws River Valley is bitter, but very fragrant. It leaves a splendid aftertaste. Do you want one? I prefer coffee from the Feinapotter Plateau. Of course, I have only drank it a few times at Welch's place. Klein politely declined. What's the third outcome? Mental disorder. Turning crazy on the spot, becoming more devilish than the devil. This is what it means by losing control. Dunn emphasized the words, losing control. Without waiting for Klein to say a word, he put down his coffee cup and continued, after a long period of experimentation and exploration, together with the birth of the blasphemy slate, humans have finally perfected the potion system. We formed a tiered system that chains into stable progression paths known as sequences. The lower the number in a sequence, the higher the grade of a potion. At this point, the 7 major churches each control at least one complete sequence. Besides, there are also incomplete paths that they have gathered over the past hundreds or 1,000 years. Blasphemy slate? Klein sharply noticed the term. At the gathering, the Hanged Man had also mentioned it. According to the Hanged Man, the blasphemy slate was the most critical factor of a potion system formation and completion. That seemed to contradict what Dunn had just said. Those were things created by some evil gods. As for which era it appeared, what it contains or what's so special about it, I am unsure as well. If you discover any clues, you have to immediately report it to me. It deserves the highest level of response, said Dunn vaguely. I mentioned one of the types of losing control. I'll now tell you the remaining 4. All right. Klein pushed the question of the blasphemy slate to the back of his mind and listened attentively. Although humans have clever minds, they lack extraordinary powers, it is not absolute. There are always a few lucky ones, perhaps I should call them the unlucky ones. They are born with relatively higher perception. Well, it also means the ability to sense spirits. They can hear voices that others cannot hear and see things that others cannot see. They have partial characteristics of Beyonders. While Dunn spoke, he looked at the empty air around him and watched Klein shudder in fear. In other words, if they are half a sequence 9 Beyonder and have fixed characteristics. Oh, sequence 9 is the lowest grade in the chain. In short, they can only choose a corresponding, fixed sequence pathway. If they consume other potions, the effects might range from mental disorders to a loss of control, or even worse, death. Got it. Klein nodded slowly. The third kind is similar to the second kind. Once you choose a sequence chain, you will be forced to go down that path. There will be no room for regret. If you were to consume potions from the corresponding sequence of other paths, there will be a high probability you will get mixed, unusual and warped powers. But it is almost certain that you would be in a semi-deranged state, sensitive and irascible, cruel and bloodthirsty, and silent and melancholic. And there is only one such opportunity. After that, regardless if you consume the potions from the original path or potions in the present sequence, the only result is a loss of control. The outcome could then be mental death. Alternatively, the body breaks down into monsters or even transforms into an evil spirit. As Dunn spoke, he lifted his coffee cup to take a sip. Klein, who turned alarmed and fearful after hearing this, fell silent for a few seconds before asking, "What about the 4th kind?" The 4th kind, heh. That is the most common problem. When we consume potions to gain powers that originally belonged to extraordinary beings, we undergo an unnatural transformation. Therefore, we would more or less be affected by the remnant spiritual powers. While perhaps the symptoms might not manifest and are undetectable to others, it will definitely lurk in one's mind. If one rushes to consume the corresponding potion ranked higher in the sequence before fully grasping the extraordinary powers the potion brings and eliminating the subtle traces, the madness will accumulate, increasing the chances of losing control. Dunn suddenly fell silent. After a short pause, he said with a sigh, "As per the internal rules of us Nighthawks, even if a teammate were to make a great contribution, they must have consumed the last potion 3 years ago and be examined before they can be promoted. Even so, there are still many who lose control every year." How terrifying. Klein drew a gasp as he asked, "Then what about the final kind?" There was no trace of a smile despite Dunn's curved lips. The fifth kind is the most common reason for a loss of control. For Beyonders, one's spiritual perception would be enhanced more or less. The smaller the number in the sequence, the more enhanced their perception. Therefore, they would hear what others cannot hear, see what others cannot see, and encounter things others would not encounter. They are constantly met with mysterious enticement and illusionary bewitchment. Once they are overstimulated or have greedy desires, they will slowly go down the path of losing control. As he spoke, Dunn looked straight at Klein, his gray pupils reflecting Klein's figure. His tone turned bleak as he said, "The founder of the Nighthawks, Archbishop Chainies, once said, 'We are guardians, but also a bunch of miserable wretches that are constantly fighting against dangers and madness.'" Chapter 19, Sealed Artifacts. We are guardians, but also a bunch of miserable wretches that are constantly fighting against dangers and madness. The corridor outside the window was sealed, its walls ice cold. The room was illuminated with bright yellow lights. Dunn Smith's delivery echoed, sending blow after blow to Klein's heart. It left him temporarily at a loss for words. Dunn shook his head and smiled when he saw Klein silent. "Are you very disappointed? Beyonders are not like what you imagine them to be. We are always treading alongside danger. There is always a price to any gain." Klein recovered from his shock as he answered with a quivering voice. It was true that he never imagined that the halo, extraordinariness, and the inordinary aspects of a Beyonder would have such hidden threats. Perhaps it was only because he was hearing a description without witnessing it firsthand and that he had been sucked into the vortex with a peculiar incident already befalling him. Klein soon brought his fear, uneasiness, worry, and apprehension under control. Of course, the thought of shrinking back was inevitable. It lingered around and refused to leave. Not bad. Very mature and rational, Dunn finished the last mouthful of coffee and added, "Also, Beyonders are not as powerful as you imagine them to be, especially a low-sequence Beyonder." Why would we use 1 to represent the highest grade and 9 the lowest? Isn't this against intuition and logic? The low sequence we often mention refers to a low grade or a high number. They are the starting point of the sequence chain. Alright, where was I? Yes, Beyonders are not as powerful as you imagine. A low sequence Beyonder's power is no match for guns, much less cannons. They are just more fascinating and indefensible than firearms. If you have a chance to become a Beyonder in the future, you must consider what I said today carefully. Do not make a rash decision. Klein gave a self-deprecating smile. I don't even know when I will have the chance. He felt that he would not miss the opportunity if it presented itself to him. Consuming the wrong potion or a higher-ranked potion in the sequence could be mostly avoided. The major potential danger was the subtle influences the potions had and what he experienced from having heightened auditory and visual perceptions. For the former, he could draw on the experiences from generations of people before him. As long as he was not in a rush to advance himself and patiently grasped control over his powers, the chances of losing control were relatively low. Furthermore, he still had to resolve the potential problem that he currently faced. He had to understand the essence of mysticism and seek a way to transmigrate back. These were the underlying reasons for taking the first step. He did not aim for higher sequence spots. If it was easy to lose control, he could just forget about advancement, stay in his original sequence, and rely on knowledge to plan a way home. It was needless to elaborate on the potential risks. Back when Klein held the luck enhancement ritual, he was nearly driven crazy. The murmurings that nearly blew up his head were still fresh in his mind. They were not unavoidable by not becoming a Beyonder, therefore, it was better to gain power that allowed him to defend himself. With this in mind, Klein felt that the pros clearly outweighed the cons. It made his thoughts of withdrawal almost disappear. Dunn picked up his pipe again as his gray eyes carried a smiling trace to them. I cannot give you an accurate answer on this. To become a Beyonder, firstly, you must make enough contributions. Perhaps tomorrow or the day after, you would be able to interpret critical ancient documents. Maybe you would be able to give us valuable ideas for one of our cases? Secondly, it depends on the arrangements of the higher-ups. No one can be sure. Alright, I believe you should know quite a bit about Beyonders now. In the future, do not make a rash decision. Now, I'll introduce you to our Nighthawk team's civilian jobs. He stood up and walked to the door. He pointed in the opposite direction of Cheney's gate and said, "We have an accountant and someone else who is in charge of procuring necessities and collecting supplies handed out by the church and the police department while standing in as a carriage driver. They are professionals and do not need to take shifts, so they can rest on weekends." The other 3 civilian staff are Roseanne, Brett, and Old Neil. Their jobs include attending to visitors, cleaning the rooms, and writing case files and inventory registration lists. They also guard the armory, storeroom, and the archives, strictly enforcing the registration should someone wish to enter, take out, or return an item. Each of them has 1 day off a week, other than Sundays. They negotiate among themselves on the arrangement of night shifts and rest days. So is my job scope the same as Roseanne and the rest? Klein swept away his thoughts about Beyonders and tried to clarify his job responsibilities. "No, there's no need. You are a professional," said Dunn with a smile. "You currently have 2 tasks. First, every morning or afternoon, go take a stroll outside. Focus on the various streets that lead from Welch's place to yours." "What?" Klein was dumbfounded. "What kind of job is this? Is that very professional?" Dunn inserted his hands into the pockets of his black windbreaker and said, "After you confirm that you have lost your memories, we will close the case on Welch and Naya. Similarly, that diary of the Antigonus family has vanished completely. We suspect that you brought it with you. You might have hidden it on your way home, which might be why we did not find any clues at your place. This is also likely the reason why you were not there and chose to commit suicide at home. Although you were mysteriously influenced and have forgotten this piece of memory, the human spirit and brain is very fascinating, so there might be residual traces. Daly might not be able to obtain them through her means as a medium, but it does not mean that they do not exist. Perhaps you will feel a sense of déjà vu at a familiar and critical spot. That is what we wish to obtain." "Got it." Klein was enlightened. The Nighthawk's deduction of the diary's location was indeed reasonable. He was the only one alive among the people involved. Only he had the time and motive to take the diary away and hide it on his way back. If you can find the diary this way, you will likely made enough of a contribution to become a Beyonder, encouraged Dunn, indirectly revealing the importance of the diary. "I hope." Klein nodded. Dunn changed the subject again. "Secondly, you get a day off every week. You can decide which day it is for now. When you are not outside, go to our armory and read the literature and canon books. This is a job for a professional historian. When you finish them all, you will have to begin taking shifts with Old Neil and the rest." "Alright, no problem." Klein heaved a sigh of relief. This is not something too difficult. At this moment, Dunn turned his body halfway and pointed to the black outward swinging gates that was engraved with 7 sacred emblems. "This is Cheney's Gate. It is named after the creator of the modern Nighthawk system, Archbishop Cheney's. There is one under the central cathedral of every major city. It is guarded by formal Nighthawk members on rotation. Inside, there are at least 2 keepers, who are sent by the church, as well as countless traps. You must not approach it under any circumstance, otherwise, misfortune will befall you." "That sounds scary," Klein expressed his feelings. The area inside is divided into a few zones. Stored within are certain potion formulas for certain sequences and other magical materials. It is also used to temporarily hold heretics, mutants, cultists, and members of secret organizations. Heh, they will eventually be sent to the Holy Cathedral, introduced Dunn in passing. Holy Cathedral? The headquarters of the Church of the Evernight Goddess located in the Winter County to the north of the kingdom, Cathedral of Serenity? Klein nodded slightly as though he was pondering over the matter. In addition, there are all sorts of classified documents and records inside. When you gain a higher clearance, you might have a chance of reading them. Dunn hesitated for a moment before adding, behind the Chinese gate, there are also sealed artifacts in the basement. Sealed artifacts? Klein ruminated on the terms. It sounded like a specialized term. Some of the extraordinary items we gather and retrieve are just too important and magical. If they fall into the wrong hands, it would cause immense destruction. Therefore, we have to keep it strictly confidential and watch them carefully. Even we can only use it under special circumstances. Besides, with that said, Dunn paused for a moment before continuing, besides, there are some things inside that are very special. They had certain living characteristics which can entice the keepers. It would influence the surroundings, attempt escape, and cause catastrophic outcomes. They have to be strictly controlled. How fascinating, commented Klein wistfully. The Nighthawk headquarters have categorized these sealed artifacts into 4 grades. Grade 0 represents extremely dangerous. They are of the highest importance and of the highest confidentiality. They are not to be inquired, disseminated, described, or spied. They can only be sealed in the basement of the Holy Cathedral, described Dunn in detail. Grade 1 is highly dangerous. They can be used in limited ways. Their security clearance is limited to diocesan bishops or Nighthawk deacons and above. The central cathedral of diocese headquarters like Backlund can store 1 to 2 artifacts. The rest will be handed over to the Holy Cathedral. Grade 2 is dangerous. They can be used with care and moderation. The security clearance requires one to be a bishop or a Nighthawk team's captain and above. The central cathedrals in the various cities can store 3 to 5 artifacts. The rest will be turned into the Holy Cathedral or the diocese headquarters. Grade 3 is considerably dangerous. They have to be used carefully. It can only be applied for operations that require 3 or more people. The security clearance requires one to be a formal member of the Nighthawks. In the future, you will see the corresponding documents. Through the numbers, you can understand what they represent. For instance, 2 to 125 means that it is a dangerous grade sealed artifact number 125. As Dunn went on, he suddenly turned around and returned to his room. He pulled out a piece of paper from the bottom of the drawer. By the way, take a look at this. 3 years ago, a newly appointed archbishop lost control. For some unknown reason, he stormed through the various levels of protection and vanished mysteriously with a grade 0 sealed artifact. Memorize this photo. If you discover him, do not alert or disturb him. Return to report it immediately or the chance of you dying in the line of duty is 1,000%. What? Klein received the piece of paper. There was no title on it, just a black and white photo with a few lines of words. Ins Zangwill. Male. 40 years old. Former archbishop. A gatekeeper who failed in his promotion and was enticed by the devil and was corrupted. He escaped with sealed artifact 0-08. Particular traits are, the picture depicted in Zangwill as wearing an all-black clergyman robe with buttons on both sides and a soft cap. His hair was dark blonde and his pupils were so blue that it was nearly black. He had a high nose and his lips were tightly pursed. His facial features were like a classic sculpture without any wrinkles. The most striking characteristic was that he was blind in one eye. The description of the corrupted is so detailed, but the only thing about the sealed artifact is its codename. Klein honestly offered his first impression. That's why it is at the highest security clearance. The search for sealed artifacts number 0-08 is only described verbally and never written in words. Even so, the description will be little, said Dunn with a sigh. 0-08 appears to be a common quill, but it does not need ink to write. That's all. Dunn did not dive deeper into the topic. He tugged at the golden chain on his black windbreaker and took out a gorgeous pocket watch of the same color. He clicked it open and took a glance before pointing outside. I've told you all you need to know. Go to the armory to find old Neil. Get him to arrange the documents that you need to read. He is no ordinary civilian clerk. He was once a formal member, but due to his advanced age, he failed to be promoted. His health is ailing, so it's no longer suitable for him to handle cases. Furthermore, he does not wish to become an internal keeper or rest at home. All he wishes is to be accompanied by documents and records. Chapter 20, The Forgetful Dunn, okay. Klein bowed slightly as he wore his short top hat again. However, his mind was preoccupied with how sealed Artifact 0-08 looked. It appears to be just your everyday quill. It writes without ink. Then, what is its actual use? What makes it classified at the highest level of confidentiality that it's deemed extremely dangerous? Can it be a pen that kills anyone whose name is written? No, that would be way too heaven-defying. Zangwill wouldn't need to escape and hide away if that were the case. Just as Klein turned around to leave, Dunn suddenly shouted out to him. Hold on. I forgot something. What? Klein turned his head, his eyes puzzled. Dunn put back his pocket watch and said with a smile, later, remember to visit the accountant, Mrs. Oriana, and get an advance payment of 4 weeks, a total of £12. After that, you'll earn half your salary every week until the difference is covered. That's too much. There's no need for this, the amount should be reduced, said Klein subconsciously. He had no objection towards an advanced payment. After all, he didn't even have the money needed to pay for the public horse carriage trip home. However, to receive £12 at once left him a little afraid. No, it's necessary, said Dunn as he shook his head and smiled. Think about it. Do you still wish to continue living in your present apartment? One that needs you to share a bathroom with so many other tenants? Even if you aren't taking yourself into consideration, think about the lady. Besides, he paused when he saw Klein nod in agreement. He smiled and sized up Klein's garbs and said with a meaningful intent, besides, you need a cane, and you should buy a new suit. Klein was taken aback for a second before snapping back to reality. His face immediately burned with embarrassment since the suit he was wearing was cheap and of inferior quality. Typically, a top hat was made of silk, costing 5 to 6 soldi. A bow tie was 3 soldi, a walking cane inlaid with silver was 7 to 8 soldi, a shirt was 3 soldi, while pants, a vest, and tuxedo were around £7 in total. Leather boots were 9 to 10 soldi. As such, an entire suit cost more than £8 and 7 soldi. Of course, to be a presentable gentleman, one needed a watch chain, a pocket watch, and a wallet. Back then, the original Klein and Benson scrimped and saved before managing to save up a pool of money. When they went to a clothing store to check the price, they ended up running off without even bothering to try haggling. They each bought a set at a bargain shop near Iron Cross Street for a total of less than £2. It was also because of that incident that original Klein had a deep impression of the prices of clothes. Oh okay, Klein stammered a reply. He was like the original Klein. He was someone who cared about his appearance. Dunn took out the pocket watch again and clicked it open to take a glance at it. Perhaps you should find Mrs. Oriana first. I know you'll spend quite some time at Old Neil's while Mrs. Oriana will likely be returning home soon. All right. Klein was acutely aware of his state of poverty and did not object to it. Dunn returned to the table's side and pulled at a few hanging ropes as he said, I'll get Roseanne to bring you there. The ropes began their operation as the gears ground, producing a chime from a bell at the reception area of Blackthorn Security Company. When Roseanne heard it, she hurriedly stood up and carefully made her way down. It did not take long before she appeared in front of Klein again. Dunn said humorously, I did not disturb your rest, right? Oh, bring Moretti to Mrs. Oriana. Roseanne secretly curled her lips as she answered happily, all right, Captain. Is that all? At that moment, Klein blurted out in surprise. To get his advance payment from finance, isn't there a need to get an approval letter from the captain? Shouldn't you write something? So? Dunn returned with a question. I mean, don't I need your signature to claim an advance payment from Mrs. Oriana? Klein tried his best to use simple language. Oh, no. There's no need. Roseanne is enough proof. Dunn pointed at the brown-haired girl and gave a reply. Captain, it seems there's almost zero management of our finances. Klein resisted his urge to deliver a sarcastic comment before turning to leave the room with Roseanne. At that moment, he heard Dunn shout out again. Hold on. There's still another thing. Can we finish it all at once? Klein turned back with a smiling face. Yes? Dunn pressed at his temple and said, when you meet old Neil, remember to collect 10 demon-hunting bullets. Me? Demon-hunting bullets? Klein returned in astonishment. Welch's revolver is still with you, right? There's no need for you to turn it in. Dunn inserted a single hand into his pocket and said, with the demon-hunting bullets, if you were to face with paranormal danger, you will be able to protect yourself. It will give you some courage at the very least. There's no need for you to add on the final sentence. Just as Klein was vexing over the problem, he answered without any hesitation, all right. I'll remember to do so. This will require me to write a formal document. Wait a moment. Dunn sat down and picked up the dark red fountain pen. He scribbled at a note, signed it, and stamped it. Thank you, Captain. Klein received it sincerely. He slowly walked back before turning around. Hold on. Dunn shouted one more time. Captain, you look to be in your 30s. Why do you have the symptoms of dementia? Klein squeezed out a smile and turned around to ask, anything else? I forgot earlier that you are not trained in shooting, so getting demon-hunting bullets would be useless. Let's do this, collect 30 normal bullets every day. Take the opportunity when you are out to go to the street corner, the underground shooting range at number 3 Zitland Street. Most of it belongs to the police department, but there is one that is specially for us Nighthawks. Oh, right, you also need to get a badge from old Neil. Otherwise, you won't be able to enter the shooting range. Dunn smacked his forehead and took back the note from Klein. He then added the information and stamped it with another seal. A good marksman is produced by expending bullets. Do not think lightly of it. Dunn handed back Klein the modified note. Got it. Klein, who was fearful of danger, yearned to visit the shooting range that very day. He took 2 steps towards the exit before carefully turning around halfway. He deliberated before asking, Captain, is there anything else? No. Dunn nodded firmly. Klein heaved a sigh of relief and walked straight out the door. While walking, he had the strong urge to turn around to ask another, are you sure there's nothing else? He resisted that urge and finally left the keeper room successfully. Captain has always been this way. He often forgets things. As Roseanne walked by his side, she softly disparaged the captain, even my granny has a better memory than him. Of course, he only forgets the trivial stuff. Yeah, trivial stuff. Klein, I'll call you Klein in the future. Mrs. Oriana is a very affable person. It is easy to hit it off with her. Her father is a watchsmith with excellent skill. As Klein listened to the brown-haired girl rattle on, he stepped into the stairwell and returned to the upper floor. He found Mrs. Oriana in the far office on the right-hand side. She was a black-haired woman dressed in a flounce lace dress. She appeared in her 30s and had fashionable curly hair. Her pair of green eyes were clear and smiling, and she seemed refined and elegant. After Oriana heard Roseanne repeat Dunn Smith's instructions, she took out a note and wrote an advance slip. Sign here. Do you have a seal? If not, you can leave a thumbprint. All right. Now familiar with the procedures, Klein completed the formalities. Oriana took out a copper key and opened the safe in the room. As she counted the pounds, she said with a smile, you are lucky. We have enough cash today. By the way, Klein, were you invited by Captain because you were involved in a paranormal activity and the fact that you have a specialty? Yes, you have an impeccable intuition. Klein was not stingy with his compliments. Oriana took out 4 notes with light gray backgrounds with deep black patterns printed on them. After locking the safe, she turned around and smiled. That's because I had a similar experience too. Really? Klein showed an appropriate level of surprise. Do you know about the serial killer that sent Tianjin City into a frenzy 16 years ago? Oriana handed over the 4 gold pounds to Klein. Yes. It's the one which had 5 girls killed consecutively. Some had their hearts and stomachs removed by that bloody butcher. My mother often used that matter to scare my sister when we were young, said Klein as he thought about it. He received the notes and discovered that 2 of them were in 5-pound denominations and 2 of them were in 1-pound denominations. All of them had a gray background and were inked in black. The 4 corners had complicated patterns and special ink to prevent counterfeiting. The former notes were slightly bigger, and in the middle of them was Lone Kingdom's 5th king, George III's direct ancestor, Henry Augustus I. He wore a white hair band above his rotund face. His eyes were slender and he had an abnormally serious expression. However, Klein felt an indescribable sense of closeness to him. This was a 5-pound note. It's almost equal to 4 weeks of Benson's salary. In the middle of the 1-pound note was George III's father, the former king, William Augustus VI. This mighty figure had a thick mustache and a firm gaze. While he was in power, he freed the Lone Kingdom from the shackles of the old order, allowing his nation to regain the pinnacle spot. They were all the good kings. Klein could faintly smell the note's ink that elated and refreshed him. Yes, if the Nighthawks had not come in time, I would have been the 6th victim. Mrs. Oriana's tone still hinted at a sense of lingering fear despite the incident having happened more than 10 years ago. I heard that the serial killer, no, the butcher was a Beyonder. Klein carefully folded the paper notes and placed it in an inner pocket of his suit. Then, he patted the area a few times to confirm it was there. Yes. Mrs. Oriana gave a firm nod. He had killed even more before that. The reason why he was captured was because he was preparing a ritual for the devil. No wonder he wanted different organs. Sorry, Mrs. Oriana, for making you recall such unpleasant memories, said Klein sincerely. Oriana smiled. I'm no longer afraid. I was studying accountancy in business school back then. After that incident, I've been here ever since. All right, I'll stop keeping you from what you should do. You still need to head to Old Neil's. Goodbye, Mrs. Oriana. Klein took off his hat and bowed before leaving the office. Before he went downstairs, he could not help but pat his inner pocket to make sure the 12 pounds was still there. He did a turn at a cross junction and headed right. It did not take him long to see a half-closed iron door. Knock. 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 While he knocked, an aged voice sounded from inside. Come in. Klein pushed open the metal door and discovered a cramped room which only allowed for a desk and 2 chairs. There was a tightly locked iron door inside the room, and behind the desk was a hoary elder dressed in a class black robe. He was reading a few yellowed pages from a book with the illumination of a gas lamp. He raised his head and looked at the door. Are you Klein Moretti? Roseanne said you were very polite when she came over a while ago. Miss Roseanne is really a friendly person. Good afternoon, Mr. Neil. Klein took off his hat as a gesture of respect. Have a seat. Neil pointed to the silver tin can with complex flowery patterns on the table. Would you like a cup of hand-ground coffee? The wrinkles at the edge of his eyes and mouth were deeply recessed. His dark red pupils appeared slightly turbid. It doesn't seem like you drink coffee. Klein acutely noticed that Neil's porcelain cup was filled with clear water. It's a habit of mine. I do not drink coffee after 3 in the afternoon, Neil explained with a laugh. Why? Klein asked in passing. Neil held back his smile as he looked into Klein's eyes and said, I'm afraid that it would affect my sleep at night. It will make me hear the murmurings of the unknown existence. Klein was momentarily unable to answer him as he changed the subject. Mr. Neil, what documents and books should I read? As he spoke, he took out the note written by Dunn. Anything that has to do with history, or are complicated and incomplete. To be honest, I have always been trying to learn, but all I can achieve is a rudimentary grasp. It's just too troublesome for the other material, such as people's diaries, contemporary books, epitaphs, etc., lamented Neil. For example, the things I have here require more detailed historical records to determine the exact content. Why? Klein turned confused. Neil pointed to a few yellowed pages in front of him. These are from Roselle Gustave's lost diary before his death. In order to keep things secret, he used strange symbols he invented to take records. Emperor Roselle? The Transmigration Senior? Klein was taken aback as he immediately listened attentively. Many people believe that he did not truly die, but instead became a hidden god. Therefore, cults which revere him have always been holding various rituals to attempt at gaining power. We will occasionally encounter such incidents and obtain a few original or duplicated copies of the diary, Neil said with a shake of his head. Till date, no one has been able to decipher the special symbol's true meaning. Therefore, the Holy Cathedral has permitted us to keep copies for research, hoping that it would bring them a pleasant surprise. With that said, Neil revealed a smug smile. I have already deciphered a few symbols and have confirmed that they represent numbers. Look at what I discovered. It's actually a diary. Yes, I wish to use history from different periods, especially events that revolved around the emperor. By comparing those records to the ones written in the diary for the corresponding day, I can try to interpret more of the symbols. That's the mind of a genius, right? The old gentleman with white hair and deep wrinkles looked at Klein with bright eyes. Klein nodded in agreement. Yes. You can also take a look at it. Tomorrow, you will have to help me with this diary. Neil pushed the few yellowed pages towards Klein. Klein turned them around and took a glance at them, but it immediately stunned him. Although the symbols had been copied in terribly ugly fashion, to the point of looking a little distorted, there was no way he could be mistaken. This was because they were words he was most familiar with. Chinese. And it's fucking simplified Chinese. Chapter 21, An old friend in a different world. In that instant, Klein even believed that he had transmigrated back. However, the elegant gas lamp surrounded by brass grids and the silver inlaid tin, which old Neil kept his hand-ground coffee in, made him recognize the reality he was in. The transmigrator, Emperor Roselle, is really a fellow countryman of mine? He was using simplified Chinese, which doesn't exist in this world, to record secrets. With the indescribable feeling of identifying an old friend in a different world, Klein quickly read through the 3 pages. November 18th. Truly a fascinating matter. A blue sky experimentation and a chance mistake made me discover the pathetic fellow lost and trapped in the deep darkness amid the storms. He can only approach the reality of this world on the day of the full moon every month, yet, he is unable to transmit his cries. He is lucky to have met me, the protagonist of this era. After reading the paragraph I wrote above, I suddenly felt a little down. Even my Chinese is written like a translation. 4 decades have passed in a finger snap. My past memories feel more like a dream. 1184, January 1st. At the Grand New Year Gala, Lady Florina was truly splendid. January 2nd. My diplomats are all idiots. January 3rd. I made a hasty choice back then. In hindsight, I should have chosen the apprentice, the seer, or the bandit. Unfortunately, there is no way of redoing it. January 4th. Why are my children so stupid? I've repeated myself so many times. Do not be fooled by those charlatans. The key thing about potions is not about grasping them, but digesting them. It's nothing about tapping powers, but acting. And the name of a potion is not solely symbolic at its core, but a concrete imagery, and the key to digestion. September 9th. An alliance opposing me has been established. Faisak from the north, Lone from the east, Fainapotter from the south. My enemies have finally joined forces, but I have no fear. I will use facts to teach them that the generations of weapons and knowledge cannot be compensated by mere numbers and low-grade sequencers. Besides, it's not as though I do not have subordinates. As for the higher grades, heh heh. Have they forgotten who I am? September 23rd. I have lost communications with the ship seeking the forsaken land of the gods. I should consider inventing wireless telegraphs. I hope it would not be affected by the storm. September 24th. Miss Ithaca is more mesmerizing than Lady Florina. Perhaps, I'm just being nostalgic about my youth. Due to the complexity of characters in simplified Chinese, the font was slightly larger than normal, leading to less content on each page. Furthermore, for preservational and research purposes, the back of each page was left empty. But even so, Klein still felt an upheaval of emotions when he read the diary. In particular, Emperor Roselle's description of the crux of potions made him feel like he found the path to the solution. He was thrilled at having learned a priceless secret. Perhaps, this will be a beacon for my future path as a Beyonder. Well, the 3 pages belong to entries at different times. It seems Emperor Roselle only writes the year on the first entry of each year. It cannot be determined which year the 2 pages with September and November belong to. Who is the pathetic fellow he discovered? What do digesting and acting actually mean? Where is the forsaken land of the gods? These questions bubbled in Klein's head. It made him eager to immediately gather all of Emperor Roselle's diary and read it from cover to cover. Klein? At that moment, old Neil asked puzzledly across him. Klein jolted awake as he hurriedly covered it up with a laugh. I thought I would be the most special one. I was trying to decipher and interpret it. You are young indeed. Old Neil nodded, laughing. I once believed that I was the most special one as well. Klein flipped through the 3 pages in his hand and after confirming that he had not missed anything, he handed it over to old Neil and thoughtlessly asked, Do we only have these few pages? I want to see more of Emperor Roselle's diary. Did you think there would be many? Old Neil caressed the scripts as his wrinkles deepened from his scoff. There are not many incidents a year that involve Beyonders and mystery to begin with. Sigh, the major reason is the gradual extinction of extraordinary species in our northern continent. Without them, there won't be a lot of potions, causing the number of Beyonders to reduce with time. Sigh, over the past few centuries, dragons, giants, and elves have become simply records in books. Even the sea folks are no longer seen near the coastal waters. Upon hearing this, Klein suddenly thought of a meme. He immediately said with a smile, I think it's time to establish a Dragons and Giants Protection Association. Old Neil looked confused when he heard that. It took him quite some time to figure out what it meant. After figuring out its meaning, he rapped the table and laughed quite heartily in a not-so-gentlemanly manner. Huh, Klein, you really are humorous. This is a tradition of our lone kingdom. It's good that young people have a sense of humor. I believe we shouldn't be overly narrow in scope. Why are we only protecting dragons and giants? It should be called Fantastic Beasts Protection Association. No, no, no. How can we forget those poor plants? Klein shook his head. They exchanged looks and proclaimed in unison, Fantastic Organisms Protection Association. Both of them laughed tacitly. The awkwardness and unfamiliarity of the atmosphere between them dissipated considerably. There are fewer interesting young people like you these days. Where was I? Old Neil's wrinkles suffused a smile as he said, I remember. There are not many incidents a year that involve Beyonders and mystery to begin with. The retards who revere Emperor Roselle are the minority of the minority. It's already pretty good that we can obtain 3 scripts. Well, the other larger cathedrals or dioceses might have some. After muttering a few words, he took the approval note which Klein had placed on the table earlier and took a look. Are they pistol bullets, rifle bullets, or steam-pressured bullets? It's a revolver, answered Klein honestly. All right. I'll go get them. Ahem, do you have an armpit holster? As a gentleman, we can't let you have something bulging below your waist in public. Old Neil made a joke that all men understood. Heh, no. Do I need to get Captain to include it? Klein smiled cooperatively. Old Neil stood up and said, "There's no need. I just need to make a record. It's an accessory item." "Repeat after me, accessory item." "Were you a teacher in the past?" joked Klein. "I spent some time at the church's Sunday school and free schools." Old Neil waved the note and took out a key from the drawer. He then opened the iron door that led into an inner chamber. Beyonders do not seem much different from commoners. Klein murmured silently before casting his gaze on the table where the 3 pages of the diary were. Emperor Roselle is indeed involved in the realm of mystery. His diary is invaluable. To others, they are just pieces of scrap paper. It is unknown when they will be deciphered, but they are a valuable treasure to me. I wonder where the remaining parts of the diary are. I have to think of ways to get more. Klein's mind went through upheavals as he could hardly calm down. This continued until Old Neil came out and closed the iron door. 10 demon hunting bullets, 30 revolver bullets. An oxhide armpit holster, and a 7th unit, Special Operations Department badge. Please count them and give them a try. Remember to sign the log book. Old Neil placed the items down on the table. The revolver bullets were arranged neatly in a paper box which was divided into 3 layers. The bullets shimmered with a yellow sheen just like the bullets back home, but they appeared narrower. As for the demon hunting bullets, they were kept in a small iron box. The shape was identical to regular revolver bullets, but their surface was silver in color. Upon a more careful examination, there were complicated and dazzling patterns with tiny sacred emblems, a black background dotted with stars and a half-crimson moon, engraved at the bottom. The oxhide holster felt solid and it came with a belt and buckle. Beside it was a badge half the size of a palm. It had a metallic background with Awa County Police Department and 7th Unit, Special Operations Department, inscribed in silver text. They formed almost 2 sealed circles and surrounded the 2 crossed swords and a crown, police emblem. "Unfortunately, it's not a Nighthawk's badge," Klein said half wistfully and half probingly. Old Neil smiled and urged Klein to test the armpit holster. After he took off his jacket, Klein took quite a bit of effort to buckle up the holster, which hung close to his left armpit. "Not bad." He put on his jacket again. Old Neil sized him up and nodded in satisfaction. "It suits you well. My judgment is as accurate as usual." After putting away the other items into his pockets and signing the log book, Klein had a short, casual conversation with Old Neil before leaving. Halfway, he slapped himself in the forehead. "I forgot to learn more about the sequences and potions. It's all the fault of Emperor Roselle's diary." At this point, he was still unaware of what the first sequence of the complete pathway the Church of the Evernight Goddess possessed. All he knew was that it started with sequence 9. Roseanne had apparently mentioned something. The sleepless? Just as Klein was slowly walking towards the stairs, a person came down. He wore tight trousers which made movement easy. His white shirt was not tucked in, and he had a clear romantic temperament of a poet. He was none other than the black-haired, green-eyed police inspector who had previously came to search Klein's place. They had met upstairs previously, but they had not exchanged words. "Good afternoon," greeted the young poet like Nighthawk with a smile. "Good afternoon. I believe I do not need to introduce myself," answered Klein humorously. "There's no need. I have a deep impression of you." The young Nighthawk extended his right hand and said, "Leonard Mitchell. Sequence 8's Midnight Poet." "Sequence 8. He's really a poet." Klein smilingly shook his hand as he returned with a question, "You have a deep impression of me?" Leonard Mitchell's green eyes were deep as he replied with a very faint smile. "You have a special disposition. He feels and sounds so gay." The corners of Klein's mouth moved slightly as he barely said with a smile, "I don't think so myself." "After encountering an accident like that, you remained alive despite not receiving our protection immediately. That makes you special enough." Leonard pointed ahead. "I have to replace Captain. See you tomorrow." "See you tomorrow." Klein turned to make way for the Nighthawk. As he walked to the ends of the stairwell, Leonard Mitchell suddenly turned around and stared at the stone-paved ground which was illuminated by the yellow sunset. He muttered into the air softly, "Did you manage to notice anything?" "Indeed, there's nothing special about him." Chapter 22, starting sequence. After he went up the stairs and returned to the reception hall, Klein was about to bid Roseanne farewell when he heard the brown-haired girl mention briskly, "Captain says that you can come on Monday. He wants you to settle your household affairs first." "All right." Klein never expected the Nighthawk's management to be so humane and accommodating. It made him feel a little grateful. He was planning on waking early the next morning and make use of the opportunity to wander around, to visit Tianjin University. He planned on informing the staff in charge of the interview that he was not participating in the follow-up interviews. After all, he had originally obtained the opportunity to make the interview because of his professor's recommendation letter. Regardless, it was basic courtesy to have formal closure. Even if it was not for himself, he had to respect his mentor's efforts. And in a world without telephones, where telegrams were charged by the character, and the fact that it would be too late to send a letter, he felt that taking the public carriage to the university was the most economical and suitable solution. Having received the captain's special approval, Klein did not need to tire himself out. He could wake up late and still make his way there on time. Klein was just about to take off his hat to bid Roseanne farewell when he suddenly thought of something. He looked around and suppressed his voice. "Roseanne, do you know what the starting point of the church's complete sequence is?" He had forgotten to ask old Neil. Roseanne's eyes widened as she looked at Klein in astonishment. "You wish to become a Beyonder? Was I that obvious?" Klein's body language betrayed him as he answered in embarrassment. "Having learned that extraordinary and mysterious powers exist in the world, it's inevitable that I have some yearnings for it." "Oh my goddess. Do you know how dangerous it is? Didn't Captain tell you? The enemies of Beyonders are not just cultists or dark warlocks, but themselves. People lose control nearly every year. Some even end up sacrificing themselves. Aren't you going to consider how your family will feel?" Roseanne's hand gestures amplified her tone as her reaction appeared overly agitated. "Klein, I think the better choice is to be a civilian staff. There's nearly no danger, and our salary increases every year. After a few years of work, you will have saved up much money, allowing you to rent a bungalow in the North Borough or in the suburbs. You can then marry a rich and charming lady and have a wonderful family, having adorable and naughty little angels." "Roseanne, stop. Hold up." Klein hurriedly stopped her in exasperation when he realized that she was changing the subject. "I just want to understand the basics for now." "All right." Roseanne fell silent for a few seconds as she lowered her gaze, feeling somewhat sorry. "Due to what happened to my father, whenever I face similar problems, I tend to be, a little agitated. However, to be honest, I'm filled with respect towards any man or woman who willingly wishes to be a Nighthawk." I understand," echoed Klein. Roseanne blinked her light brown eyes and added, "My father once said that one should never think that they can resolve hidden risks or combat danger by simply becoming more powerful or a higher sequencer. In fact, it's the opposite. They will encounter more terrifying matters. When facing the unknown or a terrifying existence, death and insanity are the only two outcomes." He ended up sacrificing himself 2 weeks after saying that. "Klein, don't look at me with pity. My life is great now, really great. It's only right to feel fear towards these matters. I only want to know the basics." Klein repeated his previous reply, not sure whether he should laugh or cry. "Captain explained it more clearly than you. And even if I do not become a Beyonder, I have already encountered something extraordinary." "All right," said Roseanne ruminatively. "I've heard Captain's and old Neil's conversation before. As extraordinary creatures are declining or going extinct, few high sequencers exist in this era. It's already very impressive to become a Beyonder. Combining our Tianjin city and the suburbs, there are hundreds of thousands of people or maybe even more. Yet, there are only about 30 plus Beyonders. Well, it's just my guess. I'm not counting the cultists and dark warlocks who hide in the dark. Without waiting for Klein's reply, she seemed to regain her vibrancy as she clenched her fist and brought it to her chest. And among these 30-plus Beyonders, most of them are at sequence 9. It seems I have gone off topic. It's okay. That was something I wanted to know as well. Klein wished that Roseanne could be like her usual self, revealing more information as she rambled on. Anyways, it's already very, very impressive to become a Beyonder. Roseanne repeated herself. The starting sequence of our church's complete sequence is Sleepless, sequence 9, Sleepless. Indeed. Klein nodded as he watched Roseanne, finding hard to stop herself from describing in detail. You should be able to guess from the name. A sleepless is someone who does not need to sleep at night. 3 to 4 hours of rest in the day would be sufficient. Man, I'm so envious. No, not at all. Sleep is a gift bestowed upon us by the goddess. It's the truest bliss. Where was I? Ah, right. A sleepless can see through the darkness even without any lights. The deeper into the night, the more powerful they become. I mean more powerful in the aspects of their physical strength, their intuition, and their mental capabilities. However, although they can detect unknown dangers that lurk in the dark, they will still rely on demon-hunting bullets and other items to handle monsters they are unable to deal with via normal means. My father was once a sleepless. Without waiting for Klein to press on, Roseanne continued. After that, it's sequence 8's Midnight Poet, and one level higher is sequence 7's Nightmare. Nightmare? Klein instantly recalled that Dunn Smith had guided his dreams. He asked as a confirmation, Captain? You know about it? Roseanne's mouth nearly turned into an O shape. Captain once entered my dream. Klein glanced around as he lowered his voice once more. Got it, Roseanne was enlightened as she answered with a whisper. She picked up a coffee cup beside her and took a sip before saying wistfully, there are only 2 sequence 7 Beyonders in our Tingen City's church. It's likely that Captain is one of them. Even if he goes to a large diocese like Backlund, he is still an impressive figure. Some deacons might not even be stronger than he is. So Captain is that impressive? Klein echoed with a smile. Frankly, Dunn Smith's appearance last night had left a deep impression on him. He had basically believed that Dunn was an extremely powerful Beyonder. Of course. Roseanne proudly straightened her back. In moments, the scatterbrained her said with a vexed expression, as for what's above sequence 7, I have no idea. Among all the Nighthawks, perhaps only Captain will know. Then what about other starting sequences? The ones that aren't complete? Klein was satisfied as he changed the subject. It had to be said that Roseanne's description of Sleepless did match his imaginations and expectations of Beyonders. However, it was not the kind he wished to become. The perfect sequence 9 was likely one that could study and grasp more knowledge of the mystery. By doing so, he could leverage on them to figure out the reason for his transmigration and lay the foundations of his future transmigration back. Roseanne thought for a moment before saying with a sigh, I'm not that interested in this aspect. I only know we have more than other churches. After all, the goddess is the mother of the secrets. Well, there should be 2 or 3. Some of our teammates are cold and distant, making me fear them. They also have a strange smell to them. Some members. Well, I mean you should talk to old Neil. He knows a lot, as well as quite a number of interesting magical rituals. Let me think. He once mentioned his sequence 9 title, which is also the name of the potion formula. Ah, yes, it's called Mystery Prior. Quite a number of interesting magical rituals. Mystery Prior sounds very close to what I want. Klein was slightly delighted. In addition, I also know of the name of a sequence 7, the kind that's incomplete. Roseanne said with a flaunting tone. She had just thought of it while recollecting. What is it? Klein was abnormally curious. In a world where high sequencers were scarce to the point of them possibly not existing, sequence 7 was probably considered quite a potent force in the church. Roseanne revealed a sweet smile as she replied smugly, "Spirit medium." "Madame Daly?" asked Klein subconsciously. After his initial surprise, he realized that it was nothing unexpected. Only a Sequence 7 Beyonder could achieve such an impressive performance as a medium. Roseanne's eyes widened once again as she said in disbelief, "How do you know of that too?" "I've met Madame Daly." Klein did not hide the matter. "All right," said Roseanne with an envious tone. "If I can become a spirit medium, one just like Madame Daly, then I'll be willing to be a Beyonder." "No, I'll consider it carefully for 10 minutes, yes. Madame Daly fulfills all my imaginations as a Beyonder," echoed Klein in a slightly exaggerated manner. Having fulfilled his goals, he chatted idly with Roseanne for a few minutes until he realized he was not getting any new information. He took off his hat and bowed before leaving. As he walked down the stairs, Klein suddenly stopped after taking a few steps. He reached out to pad the notes in his inner pocket. Immediately following that, he took out 12 gold pound notes and clenched them tightly in his left palm. Then, he reached his hand into his pocket and refused to release or pull them out again. Without realizing it, a smile appeared on his face. According to the customs of the Foodaholic Empire, China, a treat had to be given after earning money. It's time to give Melissa a treat tonight. Chapter 23, Sidearm. As Klein walked down Zutland and while taking in the warm, humid breeze, he suddenly realized something. He only had 3 pence of change. If he returned to Iron Cross Street via public carriage, it would cost him 4 pence. If he were to hand over a 1 gold pound note, it would be akin to using a $100 bull to buy a bottle of cheap mineral water back on Earth. There was nothing wrong with that, but it was just quite awkward to do so. Should I use 3 pence to travel 3 kilometers and walk the rest of the journey? Klein reached into his pocket with one hand as he slowed down his pace, considering other solutions. That won't do. Soon, he rejected the idea. It would take him a while to walk the remaining journey. Considering how he was carrying 12 pounds, a massive fortune, it was not safe. Furthermore, he had deliberately not brought the revolver with him, afraid that the Nighthawks would confiscate it. If he were to encounter the danger that instigated Welch's death, there was no way he could fight back. Get some change from a nearby bank? No way. There's a 0.5% processing fee. That's way too extravagant. Klein shook his head silently. Just the thought of the fees involved pained his heart. Having ruled out one solution after another, Klein's eyes suddenly lit up when he saw a clothing shop in front of him. That's right. Wouldn't the normal course of action be to buy something appropriately priced to get some change? A formal suit, shirt, vest, trousers, leather boots, and a cane were all within budget. They had to be bought sooner or later. Oh, it's very troublesome when fitting clothes. Besides, Benson knows more about this than me and he's better at bargaining. I should consider it only after he's back. Then should I buy a cane? That's right. As the saying goes, a cane is a gentleman's best choice of defense. It is half as good as a crowbar. A gun in one hand and a cane in the other is the combat style of a civilized person. After debating internally, Klein made up his mind. He turned around and entered the clothing shop, Wilker Clothing and Hats. The clothing store's layout resembled the clothing stores on Earth. The left wall was filled with rows of formal attires. The middle rows were decked with things like shirts, trousers, vests, and bow ties. On the right were leather shoes and boots placed inside glass cabinets. "Sir, may I help you?" A male salesperson dressed in a white shirt and red vest came over and asked politely. In Lone Kingdom, rich and powerful gentlemen of high standing enjoyed wearing black suits comprising of white shirts matched with black vests and trousers. Their colors were relatively monotonous, so they required their male servants, salespeople, and service attendants to dress more brightly and colorfully, in order to distinguish themselves from their masters. In contrast, ladies and mistresses wore dresses of all kinds in glamorous fashions. As such, maidservants would wear black and white. Klein thought for a moment before answering the male salesperson's question. A cane. Something that's heavier and harder. The kind that can crack the skulls of others. The red-vested salesperson sized up Klein furtively before leading him into the store. He then pointed at a row of canes in the corner. That cane inlaid with gold is made of ironheart wood. It's both very heavy and hard, and costs 11 solely 7 pence. Do you want to give it a try? 11 solely 7 pence? Why don't you go rob a bank? Big deal with the gold inlay. Klein was shocked by the price. With an unperturbed expression, he nodded gently. All right. The salesperson took down the ironheart wood cane and carefully handed it to Klein, seemingly afraid that Klein would drop and break the merchandise. Klein took the cane and found it heavy. He tried moving with it and discovered that he could not sway it smoothly as he wanted. It's too heavy. Klein shook his head in relief. This is not an excuse. The salesperson took back the cane and pointed at another 3 canes. This is made of walnut wood, created by Tianjin's most famous cane artisan, Mr. Hayes. It's priced at 10 solely 3 pence. This is made of ebony wood and inlaid with silver. It's hard as iron, costing 7 solely 6 pence. This is made from the core of a white boley tree and also inlaid with silver, costing 7 solely 10 pence. Klein tried each one of them and found them of appropriate weight. He then tapped them with his fingers to gain an understand of their hardness. Finally, he chose the cheapest one. I'll take the one made from ebony wood. Klein pointed at the cane with the silver inlay which the salesperson was holding. No problem, sir. Please follow me to proceed with the payment. In the future, if this cane is scuffed or stained, you can hand it to us for handling for free. The salesperson led Klein to the counter. Klein took the opportunity to release the 4 gold-pound notes from his tight grip and removed 2 of the smaller denominations. Good day, sir. It will be 7 solely 6 pence. The cashier behind the counter greeted with a smile. Klein was planning on maintaining his gentlemanly image, but when he extended his hand with the 1 gold-pound note, he could not help but ask, "Can I get a discount?" "Sir, what we have is all handcrafted, so our costs are very high," the salesperson beside him answered. "Since our boss isn't here, we are unable to lower the prices." The cashier behind the counter added, "Sir, sorry about that." "All right." Klein handed the note over and received the black silver inlaid cane. While waiting for the change to be given to him, he took a few steps back and distanced himself from them. He swung around his side arm as a test. Whoosh! 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 The wind sounded heavy when the cane sliced through the air. Klein nodded in satisfaction. He looked forward again, prepared to see notes and coins, but was appalled to see the red-vested salesperson retreating far away. The cashier behind the counter had retracted into a corner, leaning close to a double-barreled shotgun hanging to the wall. The Lone Kingdom had a semi-regulated policy on firearms. To possess a firearm, one needed to apply for an all-purpose weapon usage certificate or a hunter's license. Regardless of which type, one could still not be in possession of restricted military firearms such as repeaters, steam-pressured guns, or 6-barrel machine guns. An all-purpose weapon usage certificate could be used to purchase or store any kind of civilian firearm, but earning the certificate was extremely troublesome. Even merchants of substantial standing might not be approved. A hunter's license was relatively easy. Even farmers in the suburbs could receive approval. However, the license was limited to hunting guns with restricted numbers. People with sizable assets would tend to apply for one to use it for self-defense in emergency situations, such as now. Klein looked at the 2 wary salespeople as the corners of his mouth twitched. He chuckled dryly. Not bad. This cane is perfect for swinging. I'm very pleased. Realizing that he had no intention to assault them, the cashier behind the counter relaxed. He handed over the notes and coins he had taken out over with both hands. Klein took a look at what he received and saw 2 5 solely notes, 2 1 solely notes, a 5 pence coin, and a 1 penny coin. He could not help but nod inwardly. After a 2-second pause, he ignored the way the salespeople looked at him and unfurled the 4 notes towards the light to ensure that the anti-counterfeit watermarks were present. Klein put away the notes and coins when he was done. With the cane in hand, he tipped his hat and walked out of Wilker Clothing and Hats. He extravagantly spent 6 pence by taking a short-distance trackless carriage before transferring once before reaching home safe and sound. After closing the door, he counted the £11 and 12 solely notes thrice before placing them into the desk drawer. He then found the bronze revolver with the wooden grip. Clink. Clang. 5 brass bullets fell onto the table when Klein inserted the silver demon hunting bullets which had complicated patterns and the dark sacred emblem into the revolver's cylinder. Like before, he only inserted 5 rounds and left an empty spot to prevent any misfires. The remaining rounds were placed together with the 5 ordinary bullets in a small iron case. Pa! He snapped the cylinder in place, giving him a sense of security. He excitedly lodged the revolver into the holster at his armpit and buckled it securely. Then, he repeatedly practiced unbuckling and drawing the gun. He rested whenever his arms ached, and this continued until sunset when he heard the sounds of tenants walking along the corridor outside. Phew! Klein let out a foul breath before putting his revolver back into his armpit holster. Only then did he take off his formal suit and vest. He wore back his usual brownish-yellow coat and swung his arms to relax them. Tap. 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 He heard the sound of nearing footsteps before the twisting sound of an inserted key. Melissa with her soft, black hair entered. Her nose twitched a little as she swept her gaze towards the unlit stove. The luster in her eyes dimmed slightly. Klein, I'll heat up the leftovers from last night. Benson will likely be home tomorrow. Melissa turned to look at her brother. Klein had his hands in his pocket as he leaned against the edge of the desk. He smiled and said, "No, let's eat out." Eat out? Melissa questioned in surprise. How does Silver Crown Restaurant at Daffodil Street sound? I heard they serve delicious food, suggested Klein. But, Melissa was still confused. Klein grinned and said, to celebrate my new job. You found a job? Melissa's voice rose unknowingly. But, isn't the Tianjin University interview tomorrow? Another job. Klein gave a faint smile before fishing the stacked notes from the drawer. They even gave me an advance of 4 weeks' pay. Melissa looked at the gold pounds and solely as she widened her eyes. Goddess. What job did you get? This. Klein's expression froze as he deliberated on his words. A security company whose mission is to seek, collect, and protect ancient relics. They were in need of a professional consultant. It's a 5-year contract, earning me £3 a week. Were you vexing over this last night? Asked Melissa after a moment of silence. Klein nodded. Yes, although being an academic at Tianjin University is respectable, I prefer this job. Well, it isn't bad either. Melissa gave an encouraging smile. She asked half suspiciously and half curiously, why would they give you an advance payment of 4 full weeks? It's because we need to move. We need a place with more rooms and a bathroom that belongs to us, said Klein while grinning and shrugging. He felt that his smile was impeccable, just short of the word, surprised. Melissa was stunned momentarily before she suddenly spoke out in a fluster, Klein, we are living quite well now. My occasional grumblings of not having a personal bathroom is just a habit. Do you remember Jenny? She lived next door to us, but ever since her father was injured and lost his job, they had no choice but to move to Lower Street. The family of 5 ended up staying in one room, with 3 of them sleeping in a bunk bed and 2 of them sleeping on the ground. They even wished to rent the remaining empty spot to someone. Compared to them, we are really very lucky. Don't waste your salary on this matter. Besides, I love Mrs. Smyron's bakery. Sis, why is your reaction completely different from how it played out in my head? Klein's expression went blank when he heard his sister. Chapter 24. penny pincher. The sky outside was gradually dyed golden as Klein looked into Melissa's eyes. He was momentarily at a loss for words. None of the lines he prepared could be used. He coughed lightly twice as he quickly racked his brains. Melissa, this isn't a waste of salary. In the future, my colleagues, as well as Benson's colleagues, might visit. Are we going to host them in such a place? When Benson and I get married and have wives, are we still going to sleep in bunk beds? None of you have fiancés yet, right? We can wait a little while and save up more money in the meantime, answered Melissa in a logically concise manner. No, Melissa. This is a societal rule. Klein was stumped and could only count on lofty principles. Since I'm earning £3 a week, I should look like I'm earning £3 a week. To be honest, having rented an apartment before with others, Zhou Mingrui was no stranger to his present living conditions as Klein. He was very used to it, but it was because of his past experience that he knew how inconvenient such an environment was for a girl. Furthermore, his goal was to become a Beyonder and study mysticism to find his way home. In the future, he was bound to conduct some magical rituals at home. Having too many people in the apartment building made incidents prone to happen. Klein saw that Melissa was about to continue arguing, and hurriedly added, "Don't worry. I'm not planning to get a bungalow, but probably a terrace. Basically, it has to have a bathroom we can call ours. Also, I like Mrs. Smyron's bread, Tinjan biscuits, and lemon cakes too. We can first consider places near Iron Cross Street and Daffodil Street." Melissa pouted her lips slightly and fell silent for a moment before nodding slowly. "Besides, I'm in no rush to move either. We have to wait for Benson to return," said Klein with a chuckle. "We can't have him be shocked when he opens the door to find nothing, right? Imagine him saying in astonishment, 'Where are my things? Where are my siblings? Where's my home? Is this my home? Did I make a mistake? Goddess, wake me up if this is a dream. Why is my home gone after a few days of absence?" His mimicking of Benson's tone made Melissa involuntarily smile as her eyes scrunched up and revealed her shallow dimples. No, Mr. Frankie would definitely be waiting by the door to get Benson to hand over the apartment keys. Benson wouldn't even be able to come up. The girl disparaged the miserly landlord. In the Moretti household, all of them would like to make Mr. Frankie the butt of their jokes for every trivial and major matter. It was all thanks to Benson who initiated this practice. "Right, there's no way he would switch locks for the tenants after us," Klein echoed with a smile. He pointed at the door and quipped, "Miss Melissa, shall we head to Silver Crown Restaurant for a celebration?" Melissa sighed gently and said, "Klein, do you know Selina? My classmate and my good friend?" Selina? An image of a girl with wine-red hair and deep brown eyes surfaced in Klein's mind. Her parents were Evernight goddess believers. They had named her after Saint Selina as a blessing. She was not yet 16, and was half a year younger than Melissa. She was a happy, cheerful, and outgoing lady. Yes. Klein nodded in affirmation. Her elder brother, Chris, is a lawyer. He currently earns close to £3 a week as well. His fiancée works part-time as a typist, described Melissa. They have been engaged for more than 4 years. To ensure a decent and stable life after marriage, they are still saving money to this very day. They have yet to go down the wedding aisle and plan to wait for at least another year. According to Selina, there are many people like her brother. They typically get married after 28. You have to make advanced preparations and save up. Don't squander your money. It's just a meal at a restaurant. Is there a need to preach at me? Klein was rendered at a loss whether to laugh or cry. After a few seconds of thought, he said, "Melissa, I'm already earning £3 a week, and I'll have increments every year. There's no need for you to worry. But we need to save some money in the case of any unexpected emergencies. For example, what if that security company suddenly closes down? I have a classmate whose father's company went bankrupt. He had to find temporary work at the pier and their living conditions turned terrible instantly. She had no choice but to quit school, advised Melissa with a serious expression. Klein extended his hand to cover his face. That security company and the government. Yes, has some connections with the government. It will not easily close down. But even the government isn't stable. After every election, if the party in power changes, many people will have their positions stripped off. It turns into a mess. Melissa retorted in an unyielding manner. Sis, you sure know a lot. Klein found the humor in his exasperation as he shook his head. All right then. Then I'll boil some soup with the leftovers from yesterday. Buy some pan-fried fish, a slab of black pepper beef, a small bottle of butter, and a cup of malt beer for me. Anyway, there should still be some celebration. They were commonly sold items by hawkers on Iron Cross Street. A piece of pan-fried fish was 6 to 8 pence, a not-so-big piece of black-peppered beef was 5 pence, a cup of malt beer was a penny, and a bottle of butter weighing about a quarter pound was 4 pence, but buying a pound of butter would only cost one solely 3 pence. The original Klein was responsible for buying ingredients during holidays, so he was no stranger to the prices. Klein did a mental estimate that Melissa would need about one solely 6 pence. Therefore, he took out 2 one solely notes. All right. Melissa did not object to Klein's proposal. She put down her backpack of stationery and took the notes. When he saw his sister taking out a tiny bottle for the butter and pots for the other food before briskly walking to the door, Klein thought for a moment and shouted out to her. Melissa, use the remaining money to buy some fruits. There were many hawkers on Iron Cross Street who would buy low-quality or expiring fruits from other places. The residents were not outraged about this because the prices were extremely cheap. They could taste the magnificent flavors after removing the rotten parts, so it was a cheap enjoyment. With that said, Klein took a few brisk steps forward and took out the remaining copper pennies from his pocket and stuffed it into his sister's palm. Ah. Melissa's brown eyes looked at her brother in puzzlement. Klein took 2 steps back and smiled. Remember to go to Mrs. Smiron's. Reward yourself with a tiny lemon cake. Melissa's mouth widened as she blinked. Finally, she said a single word, okay. She quickly turned around, opened the door, and ran toward the stairwell. A river tore through the land, with cedar and maple trees lining the banks, the air so fresh, it was intoxicating. Klein, who was here to put closure to his interview, had his revolver with him. He held his cane and paid 6 pence for the public carriage. He walked down a cemented path and approached a 3-story stone building which was shaded by greenery. It was Tianjin University's administrative block. It's truly worthy of being one of the 2 major universities of the Lone Kingdom, with this being his first time here, Klein sighed as he walked. Compared to Tianjin University, Koei University right across the river could only be described as shabby. Heave-ho! Heave-ho! Voices approached slowly as 2 rowing boats made their way upstream across the Koei River. Oars were being rowed in an orderly and rhythmic manner. This was a rowing sport that was popular among all the universities in Lone Kingdom. With Klein requiring a scholarship to finance his university studies, he, Welch, and the others had joined Koei University's rowing club and were pretty good at it. This is youth. Klein stopped and looked into the distance before sighing wistfully. Such sights would no longer be seen in another week since school would break for summer. As he proceeded down a road sheltered by trees, Klein stopped by a 3-story stone building. He entered after successfully registering himself and easily found his way to the office of the person who had tended to him the other time. Knock. 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 He knocked lightly on the half-closed door. Come in. A man's voice sounded from inside. A middle-aged instructor dressed in a white shirt and black tuxedo frowned when he saw Klein enter. There's another hour until the interview. Mr. Stone, do you still remember me? I'm a student of Senior Associate Professor Cohen, Klein Moretti. You have read my recommendation letter before. Klein smiled as he took off his hat. Harvin Stone stroked his black beard and asked, puzzled, is there something wrong? I'm not in charge of interviews. Here's the situation. I've already found a job, so I won't be participating in the interview today. Klein gave his reason for coming. I see. When Harvin Stone learned of the reason, he stood up and reached out his right hand. Congratulations. You are really a polite lad. I will inform the professor and senior associate professors. Klein shook Harvin's hand and planned on making a little small talk before bidding him farewell when he heard a familiar voice behind him. Moretti, you found another job? Klein turned around and saw an elder with a head of silver hair that left a deep impression on his silhouette. His deep, blue eyes sunk deep into his face and he had few wrinkles. The man looked sharp in his black tuxedo. Good afternoon, mentor. Mr. Azek, he hurriedly greeted. Why are the two of you here? The elder was none other than Senior Associate Professor of Koei University's History Department, who was also his mentor, Mr. Quentin Cohen. Beside Cohen was a middle-aged man with bronze-colored skin of average build. He did not have any facial hair and held a newspaper in his hand. His hair was black and his pupils brown. His facial features were soft as his eyes revealed an indescribable sense of weariness like it had seen the vicissitudes of life. Beneath his right ear was a black mole which could only be seen if looked at carefully. Koei University recognized him since he was Koei University's History Department lecturer, Mr. Azek, who often helped the original Klein. He enjoyed debating with his mentor, Senior Associate Professor Cohen. They often had a clash of opinion, but even so, they were best friends, otherwise, they would not have enjoyed meeting up for a chat. Cohen nodded and said with a relaxed tone, Azek and I are here to participate in an academic conference. What kind of job did you get? It's a security company which seeks, collects, and protects ancient relics. They were in need of a professional consultant and are paying me £3 a week. Klein repeated what he said to his sister yesterday. Following that, he explained, as you know, I prefer exploring history, instead of summarizing it. Cohen nodded slightly and said, everyone has their own choices. I'm very happy that you bothered to come to Tianjin University to inform them instead of just not showing up. At that moment, Azek interjected, Klein, do you know what happened to Welch and Naya? I read on the newspapers that they were killed by burglars. The incident has become a case of armed burglary? And why it is already on the newspapers? Klein was taken aback as he weighed over his words. I'm not very clear of the specifics as well. Welch had obtained a diary of the Solomon Empire's Antigonus family from the Fourth Epoch. My help on interpreting it was sought. I helped them for the first few days, but I later got busy with job hunting. The police even came to me 2 days ago. He deliberately divulged the matter regarding the Solomon Empire and the Antigonus family in hopes of getting any information from the two history teachers. The Fourth Epoch, Cohen muttered with a frown. The bronze-skinned and weary eyes of Azek went blank first before he inhaled. He rubbed his temple with his newspaper-wielding left hand and said, Antigonus, rings a bell. But why can't I remember? Chapter 25, Cathedral. While Azek muttered to himself, he subconsciously shot a glance at Quentin Cohen, seemingly hoping for hints to jolt his memories. Cohen, with his deep-set blue eyes, shook his head without any hesitation. I do not have any impression of it. All right then. Perhaps it just shares a root word. Azek lowered his left hand and gave a self-deprecating laugh. Klein was rather disappointed with the outcome, and he could not help but add on. Mentor, Mr. Azek, as the both of you know, I'm very interested in exploring and restoring the history of the Fourth Epoch. If you ever recall anything or obtain relevant information, could you please write to me? No problem. As a result of Klein's actions today, the silver-haired senior associate professor was rather pleased with him. Azek also nodded and said, Is your address still the same as before? For now, but I'll be moving soon. I'll write a letter to inform you when the time comes, replied Klein in a respectful manner. Cohen shook his black cane and said, It's indeed about time you moved to a place with a better environment. At that moment, Klein caught a glance at the newspaper in Azek's hand. He deliberated on his words before saying, Mentor, Mr. Azek, what did the newspapers say regarding Welch and Naya? I only learned a little from the police who were in charge of the investigations. Isaac was just about to answer when Cohen suddenly pulled out the pocket watch that was linked to his black tuxedo by a golden chain. Click. He opened the pocket watch and tapped his cane. The meeting is about to begin. Isaac, we can't be delayed any further. Give the newspaper to Moretti. All right. Isaac handed over the newspaper he had read to Klein. We will be going upstairs. Remember to write a letter. Our address has yet to change, it's still the Koei University History Department office. Haha. He laughed as he turned around and left the room with Cohen. Klein took off his hat and bowed. After watching the two gentlemen leave, he bade farewell to owner of the office, Harvin Stone. He proceeded across the corridor and slowly exited the gray three-story building. With his back against the sun, he lifted up his cane and unfolded the newspaper and saw the title, Tianjin Morning Post. Tianjin sure has all sorts of newspapers and magazines. There is the Morning Post, Evening Post, the Honest Paper, Backlund Daily Tribune, Tussock Times, family magazines and book reviews. Klein casually recalled the several names that surfaced in his mind. Of course, a number of them were not local. They were distributed via steam locomotives. Now that the papermaking and printing industries were getting more advanced, the cost of a newspaper has already decreased to the price of a penny. The audience it reached also grew wider and wider. Klein did not scrutinize the details of the newspaper, quickly flipping to the news section with the report, Armed Burglary Murder. According to the police department, the scene at Mr. Welch's home was a horrible sight. There was missing gold, jewelry, and money, as well as anything valuable that could be easily taken away. Not even a penny was left behind. There is reason to believe that this was done by a merciless group of criminals that would not hesitate to kill the innocent, such as Mr. Welch and Madame Naya, if sight of their faces are caught. This is outright contempt for our kingdom's laws. This is a challenge to public security. No one wishes to have such an encounter. Of course, one piece of good news is that the police have located the murderer and captured the main culprit. We will do our best to provide news on any follow-ups. Reporter, John Browning. The matter has been handled and covered up. As Klein walked through the boulevard, he nodded in a hardly noticeable manner. He flipped through the newspaper as he strolled down the path, reading the other news articles and serials in the process. Suddenly, he felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand, as though needles were stabbing at him. Someone is watching me? Observing me? Monitoring me? Various thoughts welled up in him as Klein had a faint realization. Back on Earth, he had once felt an invisible gaze before ultimately discovering the source of the gaze. However, it had never felt as crystal clear as what he was experiencing now. This was the same in the original Klein's memory fragments. Was it the transmigration or the mysterious luck enhancement ritual which enhanced my sixth sense? Klein fought back the urge to seek out the observer. Using his knowledge from reading novels and watching movies, he slowed his pace and put away the newspaper before looking toward Koei River. Following that, he acted as if he was admiring the scenery, slowly turning his head in different directions. He acted natural as he turned around, taking in everything with his eyes. Other than the trees, grassy plains, and students passing by in the distance, there was no other person there. But Klein was certain that someone was watching him. Klein's heart raced as his blood surged through his body with the intense thumping. He unfolded the papers and covered half his face, afraid that anyone would discover anything wrong with his expression. Meanwhile, he clenched his cane and readied himself to draw his gun. 1 step. 2 steps. 3 steps. Klein proceeded forward slowly. The feeling of being spied upon remained, but there was no sudden outburst of danger. He walked through the boulevard in a somewhat stiff manner and arrived at the waiting point for public carriages when a carriage pulled up coincidentally. Iron. Zut. No, Champagne Street. Klein continually dismissed his thoughts. He originally planned on heading home immediately, but he was afraid of leading an observer of unknown motives to his apartment. Following that, he thought of heading to Zutland Street to seek help from the Nighthawks or his colleagues. However, he thought otherwise, afraid that he would end up alerting his enemy and expose the Nighthawks. Therefore, he casually chose somewhere else. 6 pence, the ticketing officer replied routinely. Klein did not bring any gold pounds with him today. He had hidden the money in the usual spot and had only taken 2 solely notes with him. And before he came, he had spent the same amount of money, leaving him with 1 solely 6 pence. Therefore, he took out all his coins and handed to the ticketing officer. He found a seat after boarding the carriage, and finally with the closing of the carriage doors, Klein felt that unease of being watched vanish. He exhaled slowly as he felt his limbs tingle slightly. What do I do? What should I do next? Klein looked out the carriage as he racked his brains for a solution. Until he was clear about the intentions of the person watching him, Klein had to assume that there was malicious intent. Many thoughts sprang up in his mind, but he dismissed them. He had never experienced such an event, and had to use a few minutes to organize his ideas. He had to notify the Nighthawks, only they could truly get rid of this threat. But I can't head there directly or I might expose them. Perhaps, that might be their goal. Following this train of thought, Klein crudely surmised various possibilities as his thoughts turned clearer. F. He exhaled as he regained some semblance of composure. He looked seriously at the scenery outside flying past him. There were no accidents along the way to Champagne Street, but when Klein opened the door and stepped out of the car, he immediately had the uneasy feeling of being watched again. He acted as though he had not sensed anything. He took the newspaper and his cane, slowly making his way in the direction of Zutland Street. But he did not enter that street. Instead, he took another route to the red moonlight street behind. There was a beautiful white plaza there, as well as a large cathedral with a pointy roof. St. Selena Cathedral. The Tianjin headquarters of the Church of the Evernight Goddess. As a believer, there was nothing odd about him participating in Mass or pray on his day off. The cathedral exhibited a design similar to Earth's Gothic style. It also had a tall, black, and imposing clock tower, situated between blue and red checkered windows. Klein stepped into the cathedral and followed an aisle into the prayer hall. Along the way, the stained windows were comprised of red and blue glass patterns that allowed colored light to shine into the hall. The blue was closer to black, the red the same color as the crimson moon. It made the surroundings seem unusually dark and mysterious. The feeling of being watched vanished. Klein acted unfazed as he walked toward the open prayer hall. There were no high windows here. The deep darkness was emphasized, but behind the arc-shaped holy altar, on the wall directly opposite the door, were about 20 circular fist-sized holes that allowed the radiant sunlight to enter the hall. It was akin to pedestrians seeing the starry sky when suddenly looking up into the dark night to see the shimmering stars in all their nobility, purity, and holiness. Even though Klein had always believed that gods could be analyzed and understood, he could not help but lower his head here. The bishop was preaching in a gentle tone as Klein silently made his way down the aisle that split the pews into 2 columns. He searched for an empty area close to the passageway before slowly taking a seat. Leaning his cane onto the back of the pew in front of him, Klein took off his hat and placed it onto his lap together with the newspaper. Then he clasped his hands together and lowered his head. The entire process was done slowly and routinely as though he was really there to pray. Klein closed his eyes as he silently listened to the bishop's voice in the darkness. Lacking clothes and food, they have no covering in the cold. They are drenched by rains, and huddle around the rocks for lack of shelter. They are orphans snatched from the breast, hope lost on them, they are the poor that have been forced off the proper path. The Evernight did not forsake them, but bestowed them with love. Echoes amplified as they entered his ear. Klein saw a swath of darkness in front of him as he felt his spirit and mind cleansed. He calmly took it in until the bishop finished his preachings and ended Massachusetts. After which, the bishop opened a confessional door beside him. Men and women began lining up. Klein opened his eyes and donned his hat once more. With his cane and newspaper, he stood up and found his place in line. It was his turn after more than 20 minutes. He stepped in and closed the door behind him. There was darkness in front of him. "My child, what do you wish to say?" The bishop's voice sounded from behind the wooden damper screen. Klein took out the 7th Unit, Special Operations Department, badge from his pocket and handed it over to the bishop through an opening. "Someone is tailing me. I wish to find Dunn Smith." As though he had been infected by the silent darkness, his tone turned softer as well. The bishop took the badge and after a few seconds of silence, he said, "Turn right from the confession booth and walk to the end. There will be a secret door to the side. Someone will lead the way after you enter." As he spoke, he pulled a rope inside the room, causing a particular priest to hear a chime. Klein retrieved his badge and took off his hat and pressed it to his chest. He gave a slight bow before turning around and exiting. After confirming that the feeling of being watched was gone, he wore his top hat. Without any excessive emotions, he held his cane and turned right, until he arrived by an arched altar. He found the secret door in the wall facing his side. He silently opened it before sneaking in quickly. The secret door closed silently as a middle-aged, black-robed priest appeared under the illumination of gas lamps. "What is it?" the priest asked tersely. Klein showed his badge and repeated what he said to the bishop. The middle-aged priest did not ask further questions. He turned around and proceeded forward in silence. Klein nodded and took off his hat. With his black cane, he followed silently in tow. Roseanne had once mentioned that heading left from the crossroads towards Cheney's Gate would reach St. Selena Cathedral. Chapter 26, Practice Tap. 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 The sound of footsteps echoed through the dark, narrow corridor, which was otherwise silent. Klein kept his back straight as he kept up with the priest's pace. He did not pose questions or chat idly with him, remaining silent like a windless body of water. After passing through the heavily guarded passageway, the priest opened a secret door with a key and pointed down a stairwell made of stone. "Turn left at the intersection to reach Cheney's Gate." "May Goddess bless you." Klein gestured the sign of the crimson moon on his chest. Commoners practiced etiquette, while the religious partook in ritual blessings. "Praise the Lady." The priest returned with the same gesture. Klein did not speak further as he walked down the dark stone stairwell with the aid of the refined inlaid gas lamps on both sides of the wall. Midway, he subconsciously turned back and saw the priest standing at the entrance. He was in the shadows and appeared like an immobile wax statue. Klein looked away and continued to proceed down. It did not take long before he hit ground laid with ice-cold stone slabs. This led him to the intersection. He did not turn towards Cheney's Gate because Dunn Smith, who had recently finished his shift, was definitely not there. He turned right and saw the familiar path. Klein went back up another flight of stairs and appeared inside Blackthorn Security Company. Seeing doors that were tightly shut or half-closed, he did not rush into them. Instead, he went to the reception and saw a brown-haired girl focused on a magazine with a sweet smile. "Hi, Roseanne." Klein came to her side and deliberately rapped the table. "Knock." Roseanne stood up suddenly and knocked over a chair and said in a fluster, "Hi, nice weather today." "Why you, Klein, why are you here?" She patted her chest and heaved a few sighs of relief. She was like a young lady afraid that her father had caught her skiving. "I need to find Captain," answered Klein simply. "You gave me a fright. I thought Captain came out." Roseanne glared at Klein. "Don't you know how to knock?" "Humph, you should be thankful that I'm a tolerant and kind woman." "Well, I do prefer the term lady. Is there a reason why you are looking for Captain?" "He's in the room opposite Mrs. Oriana." Even though he felt uptight, Klein was so amused by Roseanne he smiled. He pondered for a moment before saying, "A secret." Roseanne's eyes widened and while she reeled in her disbelief, Klein did a slight bow before bidding her farewell. He went through the reception's partition and knocked on the door of the first office on the right. "Come in." Dunn Smith's deep and gentle voice sounded. Klein pushed the door and opened before closing the door behind him. He took off his hat and bowed. "Good morning, Captain." "Good morning, how can I help you?" Dunn's black windbreaker and hat were hanging on a clothes stand to his side. He was dressed in a white shirt and black vest. Even though his hairline was rather high, his gray eyes were deep, and he appeared much fresher. "Someone is following me," Klein honestly answered without any embellishments. Dunn leaned back and clasped his hands together. His deep gray eyes silently looked at Klein's eyes. He did not follow up on the topic of being followed and instead asked, "You came from the cathedral?" "Yes," Klein answered. Dunn nodded gently. He did not comment on its merits or demerits as he switched the subject back. "It might be that Welch's father doesn't believe the cause of death that we reported and had hired a private investigator from Wind City to investigate the matter." Mid-Seashire's Constant City was also known as Wind City. It was a region with extremely advanced coal and steel industries. It was one of the top 3 cities of Lone Kingdom. Before waiting for Klein to give his opinion, Dunn continued, "It might also be a result of that notebook. We happened to be investigating where Welch received the Antigonus family's notebook. Of course, we can't eliminate other people or organizations that might be seeking out this notebook." "What should I do?" Klein asked in a serious voice. Without a question, he hoped that it was the first reason. Dunn did not immediately answer him. He raised his coffee mug and took a mouthful, his eyes not showing the sliver of a ripple. "Return the way you came, then do anything you wish." "Anything?" Klein returned with a question. "Anything." Dunn nodded with certainty. "Of course, do not scare them off or violate the law." "All right." Klein took a deep breath and bade him farewell. He left the room and went back underground. He turned left at the intersection, and bathed in the light from the gas lamps on the 2 walls, he arrived silently to the empty, dark, and cold passageway. The sound of his footsteps echoed, making him sound more alone and terrified. Soon, Klein arrived at the stairwell. He went forward and saw a shadow standing there, the middle-aged priest. The two did not say a word when they met. The priest turned around in silence and made way. He proceeded silently before returning to the prayer hall. The circular holes behind the arched altar were still as pure and bright, while the darkness and silence of the building's interior remained. There were still men and women lining outside the confessional, but much fewer than before. After waiting for a moment, Klein slowly left the prayer hall with his cane and newspaper as though nothing had ever happened, successfully leaving St. Selena Cathedral. The moment he walked out, he saw the burning sun. He immediately regained the familiar feeling of being observed. He felt like he was prey being eyed by a hawk. Suddenly, a question surfaced in his mind. Why didn't the observer follow me into the cathedral? Although I could have still used the dark environment and the priest to conceal my temporary disappearance, would it be hard for him to continue monitoring me by pretending to pray? If he had not done something wrong, there would be no problem walking in with an open and above-board manner, right? Unless the person has some dark history, making him afraid of the church or fear the bishop, knowing that he might have the powers of a beyonder. In that case, the likelihood of it being a private investigator is very slim. Klein exhaled and no longer acted as nervous as he was previously. He took a casual stroll before going around and to the back of Zutland Street. He stopped at an ancient-styled building with mottled walls. The address on the door was 3. Its name was the Zutland Shooting Club. Part of the police department's underground shooting range was open to the public as a way to earn some additional funds. Klein went in and the feeling of being watched vanished instantly. He took this opportunity to hand over his Special Operations Department badge to the attendant. After a short verification, he was led underground to a small, confined shooting range. 10-meter target. Klein informed the attendant simply. Next, he retrieved the revolver from his armpit holster and the box of brass bullets from his pocket. The feeling of being suddenly targeted made his desire to protect himself win over his procrastination. Therefore, He could not wait to come over to practice his shooting. Pa. After the attendant left, he flicked open the cylinder and removed the silver demon hunting bullets. Following that, he filled the cylinder with normal brass bullets. This time, neither did he leave an empty spot to prevent misfiring, nor did he take off his formal attire and have top hat. He planned on practicing in his usual getup. After all, it was impossible for him to shout, "Wait a minute, let me change into something more comfortable," after encountering an enemy or danger. Click. Klein closed the cylinder and rolled it with his thumb. Suddenly, he held the gun in both hands, raised it up straight, and aimed at the target more than 10 meters away. However, he was in no hurry to shoot. Instead, he recalled his experience at military training, how to form a line with the iron sights, and knowledge about a gun's recoil. Rustle. Rustle. While his clothes rustled, Klein repeated his aiming in his holding stance. He was as serious as a student taking a high school exam. After repeating it several times, he retreated to the wall and sat down on a long, soft bench. He placed the revolver to the side, began massaging his arms, and rested for quite a while. He spent a few minutes recalling his practice before he picked up the revolver with the wooden handle and bronze cylinder. He got into standard firing position and pulled the trigger. Bang! His arm trembled as his body moved back from the recoil. The bullet missed the target. Bang! 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 Drawing from the experience he gained, he shot again and again until all 6 rounds were finished. "I'm starting to hit the target." Klein stepped back and sat down again as he exhaled. Click. He swung the cylinder out and allowed the 6 shells to fall to the ground. Then, without a change in expression, he inserted the remaining brass rounds in. After relaxing his arm, Klein stood up again and returned to his shooting position. Bang! 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 Ringing shots echoed as the target shook. Klein practiced and rested repeatedly. He expended all 30 normal rounds and the remaining 5 from before. He gradually hit the target and started aiming for the bull's eye. He swung his sore shoulders and threw out the final 5 shells. He lowered his head and inserted the demon hunting bullets with the complicated patterns back into gun, leaving an empty spot to prevent misfiring. After putting the revolver back into his armpit holster, Klein patted the dust from his body and walked out the shooting range to return to the streets. The feeling of being observed arose once again. Klein felt calmer than he previously felt as he slowly walked to Champagne Street. He spent 4 pence on a tracked carriage to return to Iron Cross Street before returning to his own apartment. The feeling of being spied upon vanished without a trace. Klein took out his keys and opened the door to see a short-haired man nearing his 30s and wearing a linen shirt seated at a desk. His heart tensed up before relaxing immediately. Klein greeted with a smile, "Good morning, no, good afternoon, Benson." This man was none other than Klein's and Melissa's elder brother, Benson Moretti. He was only 25 this year, but his receding hairline and decrepit appearance made him look nearly 30. He had black hair and brown eyes, resembling Klein somewhat, but he lacked the faint scholarly air which Klein had. "Good afternoon, Klein. How was the interview?" Benson stood up as he grinned. His black coat and half-top hat were hanging on a protrusion of their bunk bed. "Horrible," Klein replied in a deadpan manner. When he saw Benson stunned, Klein chuckled and added, "In fact, I didn't even participate in the interview. I found a job ahead of the interview and it pays £3 a week." He repeated what he told Melissa again. Benson's expression calmed down as he shook his head with a laugh. "It feels like I'm seeing a child grow up. Well, this job is pretty good." He sighed and said, "It's great that the first thing I heard is such good news after being away for work. Let's celebrate tonight and buy some beef." Klein smiled. "Sure, but I believe Melissa will feel the pinch. Let's buy some ingredients later in the afternoon. Let's bring at least 3 soli. Well, to be honest, a pound exchanges for 20 soli, and 1 soli exchanges for 12 pence. There are even denominations like the half pence and quarter pence." Such a coin system just goes against logic. It's so troublesome. I think it must be one of the most foolish coin system in the world. When he said that, he saw Benson's expression turn stern. Feeling a little unease, he wondered if he had said anything wrong. Could it be that in the lost memory fragments of the original Klein, Benson was an outright, extreme nationalist who showed no tolerance for any negativity? Benson took a few steps and refuted him with a stern expression. No, it is not one of, but the most foolish coin system. Not one of. Klein was taken aback, but he quickly snapped to his senses. He looked at his brother in the eye and laughed. Indeed, Benson was great at mocking humor. Benson lifted the corners of his lips and said in all seriousness, "You should understand that to institute a reasonable and simple coin system, one needs to know how to count and grasp the decimal system. Unfortunately, there are too few talents among those important figures." Chapter 27, Siblings Dinner. It's simply sharp and incisive. Klein burst out in laughter. Using the rich experience he had from his previous incarnation, he added another insult. In fact, there is no evidence to suggest that those important figures have any brains at all. Good. Very good. Benson roared with laughter as he gave a thumbs up. Klein, you are a lot more humorous than before. After taking a breath, he continued, I have to go to the pier in the afternoon. I'm only off work tomorrow. After that I'll have time to go to Tianjin City Housing Improvement Company with the both of you. Let's see if they have cheap and good terrace houses for rent. Also, I need to pay Mr. Frankie a visit. Our landlord? The perplexed Klein asked. Does our current landlord have some terrace houses from pretty good districts under his name? Benson shot his brother a glance and said, amused, have you forgotten the 1-year rental contract we have with him? It has only been 6 months. Hiss, Klein immediately drew a gasp of cold air. He had really forgotten the matter. Although rent was paid once a week, the lease was a year long. If they were to move now, it was equivalent to a breach in contract. If they were taken to court, they would have to compensate large sums of money. You are still lacking in societal experience. Benson touched his receding black hairline and said wistfully, this was a clause I fought so hard back then. If not, Mr. Frankie was only willing to lease it to us for 3 months each contract. To those with money, landlords would sign leases for a year, 2 years, or even 3 years to seek stable income. But for us, the past U.S., and our neighbors, landlords would have to be constantly worried that something bad might happen, depriving them of their rent. Therefore, they would only sign short-term contracts. In that case, they can offer to raise prices according to the situation. Klein summarized and added, using the original Klein's memories and his own experience as a tenant. Benson sighed and said, this is the cruel reality of today's society. All right, you don't have to worry. The issue with the contract can be easily resolved. To be frank, even if we owe him a week's rent, Mr. Frankie would have immediately thrown us out and confiscated whatever valuable items we have. After all, his intelligence is below that of a monkey's. There's no way he can comprehend overly complicated matters. Upon hearing this, Klein suddenly recalled a particular Sir Humphrey's meme. He shook his head and said seriously, no, Benson. You are wrong. Why? Benson was puzzled. Mr. Frankie's intelligence is still slightly higher than a monkey's, Klein replied in all seriousness. Just as Benson seemed to smile in response, he added, if he is on form. Haha. Benson lost it and burst out in laughter. After a series of rapturous laughter, he pointed at Klein, momentarily unable to put his thoughts in words. Only then, he returned to the topic at hand. Of course, as a gentleman, we cannot employ such shameless tactics. I will discuss this with Mr. Frankie tomorrow. Believe me, he's easily convinced, easily. Klein had no doubts regarding Benson's point. The existence of the gas pipes was excellent proof. After some idle chatter between the brothers, the remnants of pan-fried fish from the previous night were made into a soup with some vegetables. During the boiling process, the steam moistened the rye bread. Smearing a little butter on the bread, Klein and Benson had a simple meal, but they were very satisfied with it. After all, the fragrance and sweetness of butter brought them endless aftertastes. After Benson left, Klein headed to the lettuce and meat market with 3 solely notes and some spare pennies. He spent 6 pence on a pound of beef and 7 pence on a fresh and succulent fish with few bones. Additionally, he bought potatoes, peas, radishes, rhubarbs, lettuce, and turnips, as well as spices such as rosemary, basil, cumin, and cooking oils. During this entire time, he continued to feel like he was being watched, but there was no physical interaction. After spending some time at Smyron Bakery, Klein returned home and began weightlifting with heavier items such as books to train his arm strength. He had planned to exercise by military boxing, which he learned from his compulsory military stint for students. However, he had already forgotten the radio exercise routines from school, much less boxing, which was only taught during the military stints. Exasperated, he could only do something simpler. Klein did not overexert himself since it would lead to fatigue and thus put him in greater danger. He took an appropriate break and began reading the original Klein's notes and study material. He wished to read anything regarding the 4th epoch again. In the evening, Benson and Melissa sat in front of a desk. The food was placed neatly like children in upper primary school. The fragrances of the dishes were composed of a rich melody of scents, the soul-captivating fragrance of the stewed beef, the obviously tender potatoes, the sweetness of the thick pea soup, the mellow flavors of the stewed rhubarb, and the sweetness of the buttered rye bread. Benson gulped a mouthful of saliva as he turned around to see Klein placing a crispy fish onto a plate. He felt the fragrance of the oil permeate through his nostrils into his throat and then into his stomach. Groan. His stomach made a distinct protest. Klein rolled up his sleeves and held up a plate of fried fish before placing it in the middle of the tidied desk. Following that, he returned to the cupboard and took out 2 large cups of ginger beer and placed them where he and Benson sat. He smiled at Melissa and took out a lemon pudding as if he were performing a magic trick. "We'll have beer, while you'll have this." "Thank you." Melissa took the lemon pudding. When Benson saw this, he raised his calm and said with a smile, "This is to celebrate Klein's finding of a decent job." Klein raised his cup and clinked it with Benson before clinking it with Melissa's lemon pudding. "Praise the lady." Gulp. He tilted his head back and drank it down. The spicy feeling warmed his gullet, bringing him great aftertastes. Despite its name, ginger beer did not contain any alcohol. It was a mixture of the ginger spiciness and the sourness of lemon that made it taste similar to beer. It was a kind of beverage that both women and children found acceptable. However, Melissa did not like the taste of it. Praise the lady. Benson drank a mouthful as well while Melissa took a nibble of the lemon pudding. She chewed at it repeatedly before swallowing it down unwillingly. Give it a try. Klein put down his cup and picked up his fork and spoon and pointed at the tableful of food. He was most pessimistic of his thick pea soup. After all, he had never eaten something so strange on earth. All he could do was adapt the recipe from the original Klein's memory fragments. As the eldest brother, Benson did not stand on ceremony as he dug up a spoonful of mashed potatoes and stuffed it into his mouth. The beaten potatoes were boiled thoroughly and mixed with the faint taste of lard and just enough salt. It whetted his appetite and made him salivate. Not bad. Not bad, praised Benson vaguely. It's much more delicious than the one I had back at work. They only used butter. This is one of my specialties after all. Klein accepted the praise. It's all thanks to the teachings of the chef at Welch's place. Melissa looked at the beef soup. The green basil leaves, the green lettuce heads, and the radishes were submerged in the colorless soup, covering the tender beef. The soup was clear and its fragrance tantalizing. She forked a piece of beef and placed it in her mouth to chew. The beef retained a little chewiness despite being stewed tender. The mixture of salt, the sweetness from the radishes, and the spiciness from the basil leaves complemented the deliciousness of the beef. She seemed to give her approbation, but she could not stop her chewing. Klein tasted it and felt that although it was delicious, it was not without regret. This was still far from his usual standard. After all, he was lacking in certain condiments and could only use replacements. It was no wonder it tasted different. Of course, even with the best standards, one could only make do with the dishes they cooked personally. Suddenly, his heart pained for Benson and Melissa, who were stunted in their worldview. After swallowing a piece of beef, Klein picked up a piece of fried tussock fish which was sprinkled with cumin and rosemary. It was crispy on the outside and tender on the inside. The char was a perfect golden brown and the saltiness and oil fragrance intertwined as one. Nodding slightly, Klein tried a piece of stewed rhubarb and found it palatable. It got rid of the cloyed taste of meat. Finally, he mustered his courage and scooped a bowl of thick pea soup. Too sweet and too sour. Klein could not help but frown. However, after seeing Benson and Melissa looking satisfied from tasting it, he began suspecting his tastes. He could not help but down a mouthful of ginger beer to cleanse his tongue. The siblings were stuffed by the end of the meal. They laid slumped in the chairs for quite a while. Let us praise the lady once more. Benson raised his ginger beer, which had only one mouthful left, as he said in satisfaction. Praise the lady. Klein downed the last bit of his beverage. Praise the lady. Melissa finally put the last bit of lemon pudding into her mouth and enjoyed the flavors swishing through her mouth. When Klein saw this, he took advantage of his tipsiness and smiled. Melissa, that's not right. You should eat the thing you find most delicious thing at the beginning. That way, you can fully appreciate its most delicious aspects. Tasting it when you are filled and satiated will not do the food justice. No, it's still as delicious as it can be, answered Melissa firmly and stubbornly. The siblings had a happy chat, and after digesting their meals, they cleaned up the plates, cutlery, and stored the oil which was used to fry the fish. After busying themselves, it was revision time. One refreshed his accounting knowledge while another continued reading the study material and notes. Time was spent to its fullest. At 11, the siblings extinguished the gas lamp and went to bed after washing up. Klein felt groggy as he stared at the darkness in front of him. A figure wearing a black windbreaker and half-top hat appeared suddenly in Klein's vision. It was Dunn Smith. Captain. Klein jolted awake and knew he was dreaming. Dunn's gray eyes remained calm, as though he was mentioning something trivial. Someone has sneaked into your room. Pick up your revolver and force him to the corridor. Leave the rest to us. Someone has sneaked into my room? The observer has finally taken action? Klein jumped in fright, but did not dare ask further. All he did was nod and say, "All right." The scene before his eyes changed immediately as a swath of colors appeared like the bursting of bubbles. Klein's eyes opened as he carefully turned his head. He looked toward the window and saw a thin but unfamiliar back standing at his desk, rummaging for something in silence. Chapter 28, Secret Order Badump. 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 Klein's heart began beating rapidly. It shrank into a clump before expanding abruptly. It made his body tremble gently. There was an instant when he nearly forgot what he had to do until the lurking figure suddenly paused. The figure pricked his ears slightly as though listening for any changes. Blood flowed back from his brain as Klein regained his basic cognitive abilities. He reached beneath the pillow for the wooden grip of the revolver. He felt the firm but smooth feeling as he rapidly calmed down. He silently and slowly pulled out the revolver and aimed it at the trespasser's head. To be honest, he had no confidence in striking the intruder. Although he was already able to stably hit the target during practice, a moving person and a fixed target were completely different. He was not arrogant enough to confound the two together. However, he vaguely remembered something from his previous life. The general idea was that a nuclear weapon wielded the greatest strength before its launch. The principle held in his current situation. The best deterrence was before he shot. By not pulling the trigger or shooting blindly, the intruder was unable to determine whether or not he was a complete rookie who had an extremely high chance of missing him. His worries and fears would make him deliberate more, resulting in him restraining himself. In an instant, another thought arose in him. It immediately made Klein turn decisive. He was not the kind of person who turned calmer when faced with danger. Instead, he had already imagined the situation when he faced the observer, using intimidation instead of attacking. The Footaholic Empire had an idiom, where there is precaution there will be no danger. When Klein pointed his gun at the intruder, the thin man froze suddenly, as though he had sensed something. Following that, he heard a voice that hid a chuckle. "Good evening, sir." The scrawny man clasped both his hands together, and his body seemed to tense. Klein sat on the lower bunk, aimed the person's head with the revolver, and tried to speak as leisurely and as naturally as he could. "Please raise both of your hands and turn around. Try to do it slow. To be frank, I am very timid and I get nervous easily. If you move too quickly, I can be frightened, and I can't guarantee that there won't be a situation where I misfire." "Yes, that's right." The scrawny man raised both of his hands and held them up near his head before turning his body bit by bit. The first thing that came into view was a black tight suit with neat buttons. Next, he caught a pair of brown eyebrows that were thick and sharp. The intruder's deep blue eyes didn't reflect fear, but rather gazed upon Klein with the intensity of a ferocious beast. It seemed that if Klein were careless for a second, the other person would leap forward and tear him to pieces. He clenched the handle tightly as he tried his best to appear calm and indifferent. It was only when the thin man faced him completely did Klein jerk his chin towards the door. He softly and gently said, "Sir, let's take this outside. Do not disturb the beautiful dreams of others. Oh, do keep your motions slow. Lighten your footsteps a little too. It's basic courtesy for a gentleman." The thin man's cold pupils rolled as he swept Klein a glance. He continued raising his hands as he walked slowly to the door. Under the revolver's aim, he twisted the handle and slowly opened the door. When the door was half opened, he suddenly lowered himself and rolled forward. The door was pulled by a strong wind and it closed with a slam. Benson, who was on the top bunk, was stirred. He almost woke up in a daze. At that moment, a leisurely and serene melody entered from outside. The heavy and comfortable voice started to sing. "Oh, the threat of horror, the hope of crimson cries. One thing at least is certain, that this life flies. One thing is certain, and the rest is lies. The flower that once has bloomed forever dies." The poems seemed to possess the power to calm and relax others. Benson, who was on the top bunk, and Melissa, who was in another room, again fell asleep amid their grogginess. Klein's body and mind was also peaceful and quiet. He nearly yawned. The way the thin man had darted off was so agile that he could not react in time. Looking at the closed door, he smiled and muttered to himself. You might not believe it, but pulling the trigger would not release a round. The empty chamber to prevent misfiring. Following that, Klein listened to the midnight poem as he patiently awaited for the battle outside to end. Within a minute, the tranquil melody which resembled the reflection of moonlight on the surface of a lake stopped, and the dark night resumed its deep silence. Klein silently spun the cylinder and moved the empty chamber away as he awaited for the outcome. He uneasily waited for a full 10 minutes. Just as he wondered if he should investigate, he heard Dunn Smith's staid and warm voice from the door. It's settled. Phew. Klein exhaled. He held his revolver and took his key. Barefooted, he carefully approached the door before silently opening it to see the black windbreaker and the half-top hat. Dunn Smith was standing there with his deep and calm gray eyes. He closed the door behind him and followed Dunn to the end of the corridor and stood amid the weak crimson moonlight. It took me some time to enter his dream, said Dunn calmly as he looked at the red moon outside the window. Do you know his background? Klein felt a lot more relieved. Dunn nodded and said, an ancient organization known as the Secret Order. They were established in the Fourth Epoch and are related to the Solomon Empire and a number of fallen aristocrats of that period. The Antigonus family's diary came from them. Due to a member's negligence, it entered the antique market and was obtained by Welch. They had no choice but to send people in search of it. Without waiting for Klein's question, he paused before continuing. We will capture the remaining members they have according to the clues. Well, it might not end too well. These fellows are as good at hiding as the rats in the sewers. But at the very least, they would believe that we have likely obtained the Antigonus family's notebook or that we have obtained a critical clue. In that case, as long as it's not something extremely crucial or important, they would abandon the operation. That is their philosophy on surviving. What if the notebook is extremely crucial and important? Asked Klein worriedly. Dunn smiled without an answer. Instead, he said, we know very little of the secret order. Our success this time is all thanks to your sharp wits. This contribution is all yours. In light of the possibility of hidden dangers and how heightened perception would aid in finding the notebook, you have a chance at choosing. A chance at choosing? Klein vaguely guessed something as his breathing subconsciously turned heavy. Dunn wiped the smile from his face as he said in all seriousness, do you wish to become a Beyonder? You can only choose the starting sequence of an incomplete sequence. Of course, you can give up this chance and choose to accumulate the merit you have garnered. Then, all you have to do is wait till there's sufficient room for you to become a sleepless, which is also the first, complete sequence the goddess has bestowed on the Nighthawks. Indeed. Klein felt delighted and did not have any hesitant emotions. He took the initiative to ask, then from which of the sequence 9s can I choose from? I have to have detailed information to decide whether to give up or accept, as well as choose which one. Dunn turned around and seemed to be cloaked in the crimson veil that shone down on him. He looked into Klein's eyes and said slowly, apart from the sleepless, the church has 3 sequence 9 potion formulas. One of them is Mystery Prior, which is also the power old Neil controls. Roseanne has likely mentioned this to you. She can never hold her tongue. Klein smiled awkwardly, at a loss for an answer. Thankfully, Dunn did not mind it as he continued. Our Mystery Prior potion formula and the later sequences that aren't directly chained were obtained from the Moses ascetic order. Back then, it was said that they had yet to fall to corruption. They persisted in their morals and precepts, determined in their pursuit of knowledge. They kept their secrets strictly confidential. Anyone that entered the order would be barred from speaking for 5 years after becoming a Mystery Prior. They would learn to keep silent, so as to cultivate and enhance their focus. The motto of Moses' ascetic order, do as you wish, but do no harm, began from them. Mystery Priors have a comprehensive but rudimentary understanding and grasp of magic, witchcraft, astrology, and other mystical knowledge. They also know a fair number of magical rituals, but they can easily sense certain existences that hide among matter. Therefore, they have to be careful and show respect to their powers as a Beyonder. We lack a large portion of this sequence, causing it to be an incomplete chain. For example, it's sequence 8. Of course, perhaps the Holy Cathedral has it. This pretty much meets all my requirements. Klein nodded slightly, to the point of having the urge to choose. Thankfully, he still remembered certain things. What about the other 2? The second type is named Corpse Collector. Quite a number of cultists who worship death in the southern continent choose it. After consuming the potion, unintelligent dead spirits would mistake them as one of their kind and not attack them. They would gain resistance to the cold, decay, and corrosiveness of cadaveric auras. They will be able to directly see a portion of evil spirits and see the characteristics and weaknesses of undead creatures, as well as gain certain attribute enhancements. We have the sequence 8 and sequence 7 that follows it. You probably can guess sequence 7, Spirit Medium. This was chosen by Daly back then, described Dunn in detail. Spirit Medium does appear mysterious and cool, but what I want most is to grasp knowledge of mysticism. Klein did not interject, all he did was listen quietly. Dunn Smith looked sideways at the crimson moon and said, we only have sequence 9 of the third type. Whether the Holy Cathedral has it, I'm not sure. It's called Seer. Seer? Klein's pupils constricted as he recalled the regret Emperor Roselle had left in his diary. He regretted not choosing sup an apprentice, bandit, or seer. You're tuning into the Biyao's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.